Chapter 12:10. The best way to lure out the mastermind was to expose a major flaw in his body. He did not want to do so, as it would put him in danger instead. There was only one way left, which was to let one of the two monks live or die in an instant. The current Guangchang Bodhisattva had transformed into a Dharma protector holding a Buddhist banner. As the banner fluttered and trembled, Buddhist power rippled. He had both offensive and defensive capabilities and walked the more ordinary path of Buddhism. However, his Buddhist power was solid and well-behaved. For a Dharma protector like him, it was useless to destroy one, as he could immediately transform into another Dharma protector. Lu Xiaoyi had already killed one of his Dharma protectors who was holding a live snake. Now, it became a Dharma protector holding a Buddhist banner. Moreover, he suspected that another Dharma protector holding a live snake could be created if necessary. Which one was Guangchang Bodhisattva's fatal point? Or could it be that the life root could be changed back and forth between the 9 Dharma protectors? Or could it be that the 9 Dharma protectors were merged into one? He could not make a judgment for now. Therefore, he could only place his attention on Lama Zongba, who was a golden Buddha. He had tested the golden Buddha with various Tao realms during his sword chi trial. It was very magical. There was a feeling that it was impervious to all Tao realms and techniques. Especially the 12 meat buns on the top of the Buddha. They had a very obvious transformation effect. Only pure strength would not be weakened. This was a test of actual combat, and it could not be fooled. These 2 monks practiced the Mahayana Dharma, which was the most popular Dharma in ancient times. It was different from the Hinayana Dharma that was popular in the main world. The most fundamental difference was that they did not have a deep understanding of the application of merit. This made it difficult for him to use the power of merit. As the 2 sides exchanged blows, Lu Xiaoyi suddenly exerted his strength. With a leap, he broke away from the Guangchang Dharma protector. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of sword lights converged. Without any Tao state, it was purely the accumulation of power as it violently slashed at the golden Buddha. As the sword light flashed, the golden Buddha's light dimmed for a moment before returning to normal. However, one of the 12 meat buns had disappeared. If one looked closely, one could see that the original meat buns on the scalp were slowly bulging. It would only take some time for the meat buns to return to normal. When mortals looked at the Buddha, they would misunderstand the buns on the Buddha's head, thinking that they were braided hair buns. This was not right, as they were meat buns, not hair buns. Of course, it wasn't a skin disease. The Buddha had 32 signs and 80 kinds of good. Then, the lump on the Buddha's head was one of the 32 signs. It was called the meat bun in the 32 signs. Meat bun. Sanskrit name was greasy sand, also known as meat bun appearance, bun, top bun appearance, top meat 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 bun appearance. Of course, a real great Buddha would have countless lumps. However, with Zongba's current level, it was not easy for him to create 12 lumps on his Dharma form. It was the essence of his lifetime of cultivation. His fighting style was somewhat similar to Ta Luo's. It was less sinister and unpredictable, but more majestic. Once the sword was unleashed, he did not stop. His figure instantly appeared in another direction. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of sword lights once again converged and slashed, cutting off another lump. It was obvious that the swordsman was planning to kill all 12 of them before the lump returned to normal. He wanted to see what other tricks Zongba had up his sleeves. Was it because he was fast? Or was it because he was growing fast? This was the best way to deal with an ancient Buddha like Zongba. He could only use his strength to defeat his opponent, but he could not use tricks like he did with Ta Luo. With Zongba's character and orthodoxy, he would never use unconventional methods like Ta Luo and turn himself into a louse. Everyone knew whether or not they could grow faster than the lumps. If they were to cultivate lumps like Zongba, they would probably be killed even if there were another 12. The 2 monks did not expect the swordsman's sword to be so powerful. It was so powerful that they could not bear it. When Lu Xiaoyi cut off the third lump on Great Buddha Zongba's head, even Guang Chong could not sit idly by. Zongba's role seemed to be of little value, like a big decoration, but in fact, its significance was also very important. With him around, under the golden light, the swordsman's sword would always be traceable. He could also attract most of the swordsman's firepower. If Guang Chong was the only one dealing with it, he would have cut off his body. Even though he had 9 bodies, his recovery speed was not much faster than Zongba's. Hence, he gave up on the Buddha's banner and switched to the sword-wielding statue. Since he could not catch up to Zongba, he might as well not do so. He stood still and waved his hands. A large amount of sword light was released from his demon, subduing sword. Although it could not be compared to the swordsman's sword light division, it was still extremely sharp. Since it was also sword light, no matter how fast Lu Xiaoyi was, he had to divert some of his attention to defend himself. In other words, the pressure on Zongba's head was greatly reduced. It was also a good way to restrain Lu Xiaoyi. Buddha's sword light division. This was Lu Xiaoyi's first time seeing it. After splitting the sword light, he understood the power of Guang Chang's sword guardian deity. It was actually not bad, as it could reduce the power of his sword light by half. But this interference was not enough. The sword light division had already merged into his bloodline. The space in Sparrow Palace trembled, and the frequency of his sword attacks became even faster. Guang Chong suddenly realized that he had only restrained the swordsman for a few breaths. Very soon, the swordsman regained his rhythm by increasing the frequency of his sword attacks. Although it was still not as satisfying as before, it did not slow down by much. The bumps on Zongba's head were still resolutely being reduced. This was Lu Xiaoyi's rhythm. Continuous, violent destruction. If it was in the past, he would not have been able to do it. But now that his nascent soul was close to 9 inches, the biggest change it brought to him was that he could continuously unleash his power for a very long time. For example, cutting bumps. To split the sword into hundreds of thousands of sword light, and then gather them to slash downwards, split them up again, and gather them again. In theory, it would take 12 consecutive times to see Zongba's final move. And this was even under Ping Ru's obstruction. 1 bag, 2 bags, 5 bags, 6 bags. When there were only 2 bags left on Zongba's huge Buddha head, someone finally could not hold on any longer. Zongba could not hold on any longer because all his abilities were in these 12 bags. He was using his Dharma to hold on, and Ping Ru was helping him. Even so, he could not stop the momentum of being slashed. Hence, for the first time, there were signs of movement. But he was very clear that his movement was meaningless against the swordsman. Unless he gave up on the great golden Buddha Dharma form and escaped, he would not leave Guang Chong alone here. Guang Chong was also a little anxious. The guardian statue holding the treasured sword was obviously not enough to restrain the swordsman. Hence, he changed to another form, the double-faced statue. The double-faced statue was also known as the incarnation statue. One statue was defending, while the other was pouncing. This kind of pouncing was not a physical attack, but a spiritual attack. In one's line of sight, there was no way to hide. There was another person who could not hold on any longer, and that was the Taoist who had been observing in the dark. He was not here to watch the show. He was not that superficial. He just felt that with the 2 monks working together, he would not be able to combine forces. It was difficult for Taoists and Buddhists to work together. But now he could no longer observe. If something happened to Zongba, what was the point of going up? Chapter 12:11. Everyone's reaction was within Lu Xiaoyi's expectations, but he was still faced with a choice. There were 3 choices. Firstly, Zongba was left with only 2 bumps on his head. What would happen if the bumps were gone? He was looking forward to it. Zongba would be at his weakest without bumps. If he missed this opportunity, it would be hard to get another one. At the very least, Zongba would not be as stubborn as he was this time. Secondly, there was the new Taoist. Lu Xiaoyi had been keeping an eye on this person. He had even left a few sword gleams in that direction to entertain his guests. He was not sure if he could take him down, but he had a high chance of catching him off guard and injuring him. Lastly, there was the most troublesome Guang Chong Bodhisattva. This Bodhisattva was a little anxious now. In order to save Zongba, he did not consider his own safety. He had created a double-faced image, but he didn't know that Lu Xiaoyi was least afraid of a mental invasion. His Sparrow Palace was incomparably tough, and the worst thing was that he had 4 great Dao shards as accomplices. If he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to deal with this most troublesome opponent, it seemed to be very reasonable. Lu Xiaoyi decided to walk a tightrope. To others, this might be greed, but to him, it was confidence. The Taoist waved his hand, and the large-scale forbidden technique, Grand Moon Primordial Fire, which he had prepared beforehand, swept towards Lu Xiaoyi. He had his reasons for choosing this forbidden technique. It was not good for single targets, so it would be easy to miss. However, if the area was larger, the probability of hitting would be much higher. Moreover, the Grand Moon Primordial Fire was highly permeable. Once it hit the body, it would be like gangrene attached to the bones, impossible to extinguish. It was the most suitable technique to deal with an opponent like the swordsman, who was as agile as the wind. At the same time, the other image of Guangchong Bodhisattva had already stuck close to Meng Qi. The two of them, one attacking the body, the other attacking the mind. Although they had never cooperated before, their cooperation was seamless. Even so, the two of them didn't dare to be careless in protecting themselves. The swordsman's strength was truly frightening. Even when he was surrounded by 3 top-notch experts of the same level, he was still able to advance and retreat with a sense of propriety. The ones who were forced to use their trump cards were the 3 who had the advantage in numbers. Just based on this point alone, it was really hard to say who would be cut down by the river of sword chi that was hanging upside down in the sky. This person is deceitful. We must guard against him. Lu Xiaoyi was still moving as if he was flying. He displayed the true essence of controlling the sword to the extreme. The sword chi in the sky gathered and suddenly chopped down. Out of the 3 opponents, 2 of them felt their hearts fall back into their stomachs, while the other had his eyes in his throat. The one who was struck was still Zongbala. This made him very depressed. What's wrong? Are you trying to bully me? The sword light was still sharp, and there was only a bump left on Zomba's head. It was lonely, like a horn that had yet to grow out. Thus, everyone knew that the swordsman's ultimate target was still Zongba. Guangchong and the Taoist attacks weren't ordinary either. They were both top-notch experts of the Yuanying realm. So how could Zongbala ignore them and use his sword to block their attacks? Guangchang's layered image instantly imprinted itself into Lu Xiaoyi's Sparrow Palace. Before it could explode in the vast sea of consciousness, for Dao shards surrounded it. This was reflected in Ping Ru's senses. Of course, he didn't know that there were only 4 Dao shards. He thought that there were 4 Dao shards. For a moment, he was completely suppressed. Other than restraining a portion of the swordsman's spiritual energy, he didn't have much of an effect. The Taoist lunar primordial fire wasn't as fast as the layered image. Lu Xiaoyi still managed to dodge most of it, but he couldn't avoid being swept by the flames. Green smoke rose from his buttocks. Under normal circumstances, he would use his inner secret to solve the problem in his sea of consciousness before wiping his buttocks clean. However, this bought Zongba precious time. At this point, Lu Xiaoyi obviously couldn't choose to heal his injuries. He wouldn't die, so what was the hurry? This was a rare opportunity. If he didn't grasp it now, it would be too late for regrets. Seeing that the sword light once again covered the sky, Zongba couldn't hold on anymore. He thought to himself, "You're a great swordsman, so why are you so fixated on a monk like me?" The bumps on his head were his 12 protective talismans. Once they were all slashed with the power of the swordsman's sword, he wouldn't be able to withstand it without the bumps. He only had 1 death exemption golden bun left. If he lost it, he wouldn't have any room to maneuver. There was fear in his heart. Of course, he also had his own way of escaping. If this flying sword slashed down again, he could directly teleport. They were all nascent soul cultivators who didn't have the ability to run away in a second. Of course, Guangchong and the Taoist wouldn't let him escape. If he escaped, even if it was only for a short period of time? What would happen to the remaining two? Taoism and Buddhism weren't unified. Their coordination was bumpy. How could it be as smooth as the first time? With worry, he could only take the risk to restrain Zongba. Or rather, it wasn't restraint anymore. He was temporarily treating himself as the main force. Just when he had the thought of risking his life, the river of sword aura formed once again. According to the usual practice, it would definitely slash at Zongba La, who had 12 lives left. Guangchang's layered image appeared once again. He didn't believe that anyone could withstand his spiritual attack. If he could withstand it once, how many times could he withstand it? He had already noticed that the swordsman's sword light this time was less than before. This meant that his spiritual attack was still effective. The Taoist fire grew bigger. It had already turned into the lunar primordial fire formation. There was no need to change the fire seed. He had already touched the Yin fire a little. As long as the area was bigger, he didn't believe that this person could ignore the primordial fire. Of course, he had some doubts too. If a normal cultivator was hit by the lunar primordial fire, even if it was just a little touch, the fire would gradually expand and spread. However, the small flame on the swordsman's buttocks didn't seem to have any changes. There was too little time for him to think carefully. He could only act based on his experience. The sword light gathered and suddenly slashed down. Zongba La's secret incantation was at the tip of his tongue. He only needed one more word to teleport away. However, he didn't say in the end. This was because the sword wasn't aimed at him. If he could stay, he would rather stay. After all, it wasn't nice to run away at the last minute. The Taoist didn't expect that he would be the one to be struck this time. The best way to fight one against many in a battle was to hold one person down and beat him to death. This was the same as fighting on the streets. In a situation like this, of course, he would have to hold the Lama down and beat him up. There was no reason for him to deal with a fresh force like him. Hundreds of thousands of sword light gathered and slashed down. This was no joke. The Taoist used all his skills. He didn't even release the fire. He threw out all the treasured weapons he had as if they were free. However, this was still not enough. He still had one more move, ink painting. It was to separate the colors of the body. It was equivalent to creating a clone in an instant. The clone had the exact same spiritual sense locking ability. There was only one sword. In a situation where he couldn't be sure which one was the real body, he could only rely on luck to slash one. If he slashed the right one, everything would be over. If he slashed the wrong one, he would still be alive. Chapter 12:12. The Taoist's ink impression was a defensive strategy that relied purely on luck. Although it was not very reliable, it was fast and convenient to use. Moreover, there were no restrictions, and it could be used indefinitely. At such a critical moment, it was better than nothing. The sword light was like a hot knife through butter. It directly broke through the imperfect defense that the Taoist hastily built up. Liu Xiaoyi's strategy was impeccable, and he achieved his goal. It was just that he lacked luck in the last part. The sword light could not be judged as real or fake in the two choices. It could only be chosen randomly. As the light and shadow shattered, the Taoist who was lucky enough to survive did not dare to be careless anymore. He stopped releasing his fire and started to defend himself. There were so many things to do, but his life was the most important. It was a pity, but Liu Xiaoyi would never live in regret. When he was about to kill the Taoist, Guangchang's double-face image imprinted another image into his sea of consciousness. Liu Xiaoyi was not afraid of this thing, but it was not completely harmless. He needed to mobilize his spiritual energy and the four shards of Tao to encircle and suppress it. With his spiritual energy restrained, the sword light that could be divided from the outside was naturally not enough. Now, it could probably reduce the number of sword lights by tens of thousands. It was between 10 to 20%. However, if he allowed Guangchang to do as he pleased, the impact would be greater. This was because spiritual energy was very difficult to remove quickly. Within a few breaths, the swordsman who was on fire with his, but on fire was indeed very strong. but he was also very greedy. Guangchong sharply grasped this point. Kill this monster now. Do it with all your might. Do it without hesitation. He was warning the other two not to teleport away from the battlefield because of the attack. They were indeed in danger, but how could there be no danger in a battle between cultivators? Although they were in danger, so was the swordsman. His two double faces and the Taoist Grand Moon Primordial Fire had more or less achieved their goals. Now, it was time to see who could persevere and who would retreat. Whoever retreated would lose a great opportunity. They were all Yuanying elites. The Taoist priest and Zongba could clearly see that the Taoist priest had been struck by lightning. He had managed to avoid it by sheer luck and did not run away. However, it was understandable for him to temporarily set up a defense with his magical item. Zongba gritted his teeth. In such a situation, he could not really leave. He could only gamble with everyone. Previously, he had been on the defensive because 90% of the swordsman's attacks landed on his head. But now, things were slightly different. It seemed like the swordsman was interested in the Taoist as well. This Taoist's offensive spells were very sharp, but his defense was much weaker than Zongba's. Therefore, he now felt that he might not be the swordsman's ultimate target. It had been 15 minutes since the first bun was struck. He secretly used a secret technique to speed up the regeneration of the bun. He estimated that the first bun would regenerate in a few breaths' time. In other words, his safety was guaranteed after a few breaths' time. He just had to hold on for a few breaths' time. Even Bodhisattvas had Vajra glaring eyes. Since he had decided to gamble with everyone, Lama Zongba displayed a decisiveness befitting of his realm and status. It was rare to see a golden Buddha closing in on the swordsman. At the same time, he swung his fist. The Buddhas will cover the sky and earth. His fist was like a mountain pressing down on the swordsman. With his Buddha form, the most suitable technique for him was one Buddha breaks all spells. His punch might seem simple, but it was his most powerful attack. He did not seek to be unpredictable. He only sought to strike the Buddha directly. At this moment, the sky was once again filled with sword rays. Although he was constantly under attack from two people, the Taoist and Guangchong, and now the Lama and Guangchong, Lu Xiaoyi still chose to attack without hesitation. From the initial probing to the current situation, everything was not completely under his control. However, this situation was also what he liked the most. When it came to fighting for the front line, he was never a coward. The Yin fire on his buttocks was burning his balls, but it was still a physical pain. The Taoist had always wondered why the Yin fire could not burn through his bones and spread to his entire body. Only Lu Xiaoyi himself understood this logic. As a man who once aspired to become a Dharma cultivator, he was best at setting fire, which was also known as the Yin fire. His Yin fire did not make much progress in the past 1,000 years. Perhaps he really did not have the talent in this area. However, he often set fire to the Yin fire from praising Dharma cultivators. His understanding of this thing was not low. The basic principle was clear. He could manipulate nature. Of course, he could not let the Yin fire wreak havoc. The reason why he did not extinguish it was because he did not want the Taoist to use other methods. Now that the Taoist saw that he could not handle the Yin fire, he naturally increased the intensity of the Yin fire to burn him. This was also a part of the tactical deception. This kind of deception could not be hidden for too long. He did not need to hide it for too long. As long as he could kill one of the three, the purpose of the deception would be achieved. Once the sword aura river was formed, the three opponents began to worry about who would be hit this time. The Taoist was worried. Because Lu Xiaoyi gathered his sword too quickly, he did not care about his own injuries. This was the fighting style of a street gangster. His defense system could not be completely set up in just 1 or 2 breaths, because normal defense could not stop him. He had to use 120% of his defensive ability. Therefore, he was in the most danger. He could not count on the luck of the ink painting impression to happen again. Zongba Lama was also a little worried, because the sword could hit him too. Courage was courage. Life was life. It was not his character to not care about his own safety. Therefore, when he swung his fist, he also created a fake Buddha for his golden Buddha. The foundation was similar to the ink painting impression of the Taoist. They were both the fastest and most convenient methods. The real and fake Buddha had a 50% chance of dodging swordsman's fatal attack. He did this because he was concerned about his own safety. However, a cultivator who did not hesitate and swung his fist with no regard for his own safety was not the same as swinging his fist while thinking of creating a fake Buddha. He cannot be blamed for being too cautious. Subconsciously, Zongba Lama still did not think that he could make the final decision. He always thought that he was harassing and restraining instead of risking his life to fight. There were 3 people. Why did he have to be the one risking his life? Under Liu Xiaoyi's continuous pressure, Zongba Lama finally showed a slight flaw in his choice. Because he did not use his full strength in his punch, Liu Xiaoyi had one more way to deal with it. He could take it head on. When there were too many people, there would be dependence. When there were too many people, there would be shirking responsibility. Guangchang's strength was the highest among the 3. Subconsciously, Zongba and the Taoist thought that he should be the one to deal the fatal blow and not them. Since Guangchang did not bear the brunt of the pressure and was the strongest, why did he not use his ultimate move to deal with it? This was human nature. They were still humans, not immortals. Liu Xiaoyi's vertical escape was at its peak. If not for Zongba's golden light, his shadowless movement would have given him a lot of opportunities. However, there were too many factors that he needed to consider. The Taoist was the easiest to kill because his defense was not formed yet. Zongba was the one who should be killed the most because his golden light had been affecting the progress of the battle from the beginning to the end. His movements and sword tracks were exposed. Guangchang was the one who posed the greatest threat to him. It was all because of this person that his sword light differentiation ability had decreased by 10 to 20%. In theory, the one who should not be killed was Guangchang. However, when the sword light converged and fell, it was out of everyone's expectations that the target was Guangchang Bodhisattva. Chapter 12-13. What's wrong with Single Ear? There's no purpose to this battle. This should not be his level. Yu Qian was a little anxious. However, there was no point in being anxious. She could not extend her hand and could not even remind him, because the location of the final battle was near the Tao source. The scene of the battle in the Tao tablet space was extremely clear in the eyes of the spectators outside. The beginning of this battle was very boring because no one could see anyone. From the moment both parties entered until now, only 1 or 2 battles have been fought. It was not fun to watch. It was like watching an outdoor movie. The screen was white and there was nothing on it. However, everyone knew that the battle had been going on throughout this period of time. It was very tempting. However, all the waiting was worth it. As the battle neared its end, the space within the Tao monument started to become unstable. At the source of the Tao, the show finally began. As soon as the show began, it was brilliant and varied. It was thrilling. The road was full of twists and turns, and danger lurked everywhere. There was no way to predict the outcome. There was no way to predict the next step. This kind of battle was truly satisfying. Zhou Sword Cultivator suppressed the 2 monks by himself and forced out the Taoist. Following that, a series of drastic changes occurred. The spectators were all shocked. The fighting style of a sword cultivator was too unconventional. It was too arrogant, too domineering. 1 against 3, but it also had a firm grasp of the flow of the battle. It could cut down whoever it wanted, hit whoever it wanted. It was just that the process was somewhat suspenseful. No one knew what effect Guangchang's attack had achieved. When would the grand moon primordial flame burn through the swordsman's? But even if that part of his but was really thick, it did not make sense that it could not be burned through. However, those with good foresight could see that there was a problem. Black Star replied, "This is not Senior Shan style, right?" Looking at his previous battles, he had been saving his energy whenever he could and using underhanded tactics whenever he could. Why was he fighting so brainlessly now? He can just hold anyone down, regardless of whether it's Zongba or that Taoist. He can just use his chisel to solve the problem. This was a very normal battle strategy. It was also the best way to fight when one was outnumbered. They were all very worried because the sheer number of people in the impermanence Tao source indicated that something was amiss. The people of Zhou must be at a disadvantage. Otherwise, Shan Er wouldn't be the only one who rushed over. The battle had been going on for a long time, and no reinforcements came, which meant that reinforcements would never come. It was precisely because of this that Shan Er's role in this battle was infinitely magnified. If something happened to him, the outcome would be decided. However, his brainless fighting style now made all the cultivators of Zhou worry about him. However, Chang Di was not worried. Instead, she sighed and said, "You guys still haven't seen enough. He must have his own reasons for slapping him like this." It didn't make sense for him to lose his cool at such a crucial moment. He saw through Zhou Xian's disadvantage in the Dao tablet space, so he had no choice but to do this. Yu Ting pondered. "Senior apprentice brother, what do you mean?" Chang Di explained. "Your opinion is nothing more than holding back a breakthrough. But in this situation, what if you can't hold it back? What if the person being held down doesn't care about his face and just teleports away? For example, that Zongba only has one bun left and is on the verge of danger. I dare say that he has already prepared a method to escape at any time. As long as the sword falls, he will leave without a care. Then, what's the point of waiting for his 12-bun to recover and then come back?" The two of them were deep in thought. Chang Di pointed out, "What's false is true, and what's true is false. Of course, holding down one person and killing them is the correct solution. However, the problem is that before you kill them, you can't let them know your true state of mind. Otherwise, they will leave immediately. Then, everything you've done will be for naught. Who do you want to kill? When do you want to make your move? You have to make it so that the opponent can't figure it out. There are 3 of them, so you have to make all 3 of them have illusions and make them feel that the other 2 are more dangerous. Only then will they stay and observe the situation. With this observation and this guess, Single Ear will have achieved his goal." Yu Ting nodded approvingly. "The situation in the space is very clear now. Single Ear will definitely understand that the situation in Zhou Xian is not good. He has to kill 1 or 2 more to make up for it. Therefore, what he's most afraid of now is that the 3 of them will feel the danger and simply give in and leave. In the end, he will wait for everyone to gather before attacking. Therefore, he deliberately took the risk, deliberately suffered Guang Chang's mental attack, and deliberately carried fire with him. He wants the 3 of them to see hope and feel that there is a possibility of solving the problem. Only when everyone is here can he fish in troubled waters. When he's ready, he will attack the final target. That will happen in an instant." Black Star sighed, "But it's also very dangerous for him. On the other hand, all his schemes have ended up benefiting someone else." Chang Di snorted. "Victory is found in danger. How can there be a victory without risk? Swordsmen are the best at this. As long as it's chaotic enough, dangerous enough, and unpredictable enough, swordsmen will have a chance. You have to understand that for orthodoxies like swordsmen, what they are most afraid of is 2 people competing in cultivation without any waves. Therefore, I'm not worried. The more chaotic it is, the less worried I am. If you don't believe me, look at those sun gods. They are the ones who are truly worried." Black Star muttered, "This habit of swordsmen is really not something that every cultivator can grasp. It's a terrifying orthodoxy." Chang Di snorted. "That's why they have few people. That's why it's difficult for them to pass on their legacies. Because this kind of ability can't be learned. They can only kill. Out of 10 swordsmen, 1 or 2 of them will survive in the end and naturally learn it. You have to be careful. The higher the realm of the swordsman, the more terrifying they are. This is because they have all killed their way through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Yes, I'm talking about the real swordsmen. The ones in Zhou Xian don't count." Yu Ting sighed as well. "Therefore, be it Buddhism or Orthodox Taoism, we walk on the path of gathering the masses to form a powerful force, while the sword range walks on the path of solitude. They could decide the direction of battle, but for a period of time, we will definitely be the ones who have the last laugh. Chang Di smiled and nodded. Exactly. Therefore, the stage may be theirs, but the benefits will definitely be ours. Glorious stage or eternal legacy? Was there a need to choose? Black Star's realm was limited, and he still couldn't get rid of the confusion in front of him. He wanted to know the result of this battle more than what would happen to the cultivation world thousands of years later. It was none of his business. Martial uncle, who do you think senior brother Shan will kill in the end? Who is his real target? Seeing that Yu Ting also looked over, Chang Di shook his head and smiled bitterly. You guys, since he had attacked all three of them, he must have wanted to kill all three of them. As for who he will choose in the end, it depends on the actual situation. If you make a decision too early, you will lose the path of impermanence. This is the brilliance of Single Ear. If he doesn't make a decision himself, how can the other three guess it? But if I have to guess, I guess it will be Zone Ba. His myriad golden light is really too annoying, especially for swordsmen. Chapter 12:14. Among the tens of thousands of heaven's chosen cultivators who were watching the commotion, the ones who were the most excited were the swordsman group. I can't compare to such a sword technique. I've crossed paths with Guang Chang before. To be honest, I can't do anything to him. He's only at the peak of Yuanying, but he's able to resist me. A true monarch. I don't know if it's because he's too outstanding or because my sword technique isn't good enough. But now I know that it's because my sword technique isn't good enough. Model Bamboo sighed and admitted his own shortcomings. This was the style of their group. They weren't some sex system, so there weren't many rules. They were just a group of independent cultivators. A swordsman became impatient. Brother Model Bamboo, don't sigh over there. Everyone comprehended by themselves in the nameless sword Dao steel. Their foundations are even more complicated. Isn't it normal that they don't learn systematically? Tell us, is this single-eared sword technique the same as the one in the sword Dao steel? I don't think it's the same, but I feel like there's something I haven't seen through. It seems right, but isn't. It makes me anxious. Huang Yin interjected. It doesn't look like it on the surface, but there's a connection between the two. A swordsman laughed. Old Ninth Huang, you're talking nonsense. All the sword vein in the universe are connected. I think you're just anxious to find a master so that you can learn swordsmanship systematically. Am I right? Huang Yin glared. Wan Shi, don't just stand there and talk. If you really find a master, don't go if you have the ability. Who knows? You might be able to learn a peerless sword technique yourself. Model Bamboo smiled bitterly. I can't see it either, but I've heard that the top swordsmen in the origin world will form their own sword path after reaching a certain height. I wonder if this person is like that. There's no point in discussing this. The only way is to go to the sword Dao steel. Once you reach out and draw your sword, you'll understand. Whether it was the carefree travel group, the heaven's chosen swordsmen, or the tens of thousands of noisy cultivators, none of them actually understood the essence of the problem. But Sun God, true monarchs were different. They saw deeper and further. Yuan Yang God was very impolite in his divine sense. Did you see that? I dare to bet that the heaven's chosen one must have done something to his luck. Otherwise, how could that Taoist's ink impression be so lucky? This was not the first time something like this had happened, and it wouldn't be the last time. If that swordsman Xiao Yao Yu wants to win, he still has a long way to go. Xian Liuzi sighed. This is the so-called home advantage. It is unavoidable. Fortunately, they cared about their reputation and did it secretly. There was still some influence, but it wasn't absolute. No matter how much one's providence increased, there was still a limit. For example, that trash's ink impression. If I kill him 3 more times, I'll definitely succeed once. Primordial beginning Yang God shook his head. Senior brother, do you think you're chopping radishes? 3 more times? I don't think he'll be able to do it 2 more times. Prepare for failure. Immortal Liuzi laughed. What? Are you not going to wait for that disciple of yours? He should still be fighting somewhere else. There's still a chance. Yuan Yang God smiled bitterly. Upper Prime? He has the ability, but he's not as good as this swordsman. He has no problem dealing with ordinary elites like Yuanying. But if there are people like Guangchong and Deadtree among them, he'll only have the ability to fight one-on-one, so I don't count on it. For our Zhou Xian's round, it depends on the situation. If the swordsman succeeds, we can still fight. If he fails, then there's no hope. Xian Liuzi was not thinking about this. Looks like the heavens chosen one has a lot of reserves in this area. They even used it on such a small occasion. Or do they think it's very important? What do they want to achieve? What do they want to express? Is it good or bad for our Zhou Xian? Do they value it or look down on it? A huge sword light slashed down. Guangchong really did not expect that the target would be him. Almost at the same time, the two heavy facet images that were mysteriously connected to him were suddenly surrounded and destroyed by the swordsman's spiritual power. Obviously, the swordsman saw through something and began to attack his heavy facet images in his sea of consciousness and outside at the same time. This was actually the key to completely deciphering the heavy facet images. He was very sharp and decisive. Otherwise, with Guangchang's heavy facet images, how could it be so easy to deal with him? His heavy facet images were connected to the swordsman's sea of consciousness. As long as he could figure out the pattern of the swordsman's spiritual power, he could begin the next step of his attack. However, there was something strange about the swordsman's sea of consciousness. Before he could figure out, the swordsman had decisively attacked him. This person's sense of danger was very accurate. This forced him to stop his heavy facet image. Just like the other two, as the main attacker of the three, he also wanted to end the battle in one blow. Otherwise, he would lose face. But now, he realized that the swordsman's battle experience was very rich. Ordinary people could not compare to him. It was unrealistic to want to end the battle in one blow. More often than not, the swordsman would respond fiercely. He had to change his strategy. Just like the Taoist, he had to slowly accumulate small victories to achieve a great victory. That was the right way to go about it. Up until now, Guangchong had to admit that he was not a match for the swordsman. Since he was not strong enough, he should not have thought of ending the battle in one blow. As the sword fell, the heavy facet image turned into ashes. Almost at the same time, another heavy facet image appeared out of thin air, carrying an owl. This was Guangchang's choice. Since he did not want to end the battle in one blow, he had to find a heavy facet image that was fast, accurate, and weak in terms of damage. The owl body was the best choice. Lu Xiaoyi was hit by the punch, and the Buddha's power penetrated his heart. Even if this was not Zhong Ba's full blow, the power of the punch from the big Buddha's head could not be underestimated. The Buddhist energy fist was not the full Tao state of the fist of mana, nor was it the pure strength of the fist of physique cultivators. The strength of the Buddhist energy fist was pure Buddhist energy. This was the foundation of every orthodoxy. Under normal circumstances, a Taoist would be slightly injured after receiving such a punch. It was not impossible for them to lose their ability to fight on the spot. Because they had to deal with the Buddhist energy that entered their body, the strength they could use was limited. This was the inevitable consequence. However, Lu Xiaoyi was different. He was a unique virtuous swordsman. He had a very profound virtuous Tao state. Therefore, he did not use his mana to resist the Buddhist energy. Instead, he used his virtuous Tao to dissolve the Buddhist energy. Since they were of the same origin, not only did it save him energy, it was also faster. Moreover, it did not leave behind any hidden dangers. Therefore, he did not care too much about it. With a rush of his head, another river of sword chi began to form. This did not make sense. The only explanation was that he's going all out. As long as we hold him back, he won't be able to hold on for long. Guangchang's consciousness shouted. At the same time, he released the strange-looking owl in his hand. At the same time, he finally completed his strongest defense system, which was still the Grand Moon primordial flame that he was best at. Zhongba did not expect that his punch would succeed. Unfortunately, the strength of this punch was not enough. However, he did not regret it. Ensuring his own safety was always the first priority. Coordinating with the attacks of his two companions, he also threw out a second punch. Chapter 12:15. In the eyes of outsiders, the swordsman had made a huge mistake. Previously, he could still suppress one of them to defend while the other two attacked. But now, all three of them were attacking at the same time. It was obvious that he could kill whoever he wanted. They now had the confidence to do so. Because the swordsman was now under the Taoist's fire, the Bodhisattva's spirit, and the Lama's fist. No matter how strong he was, how could he deal with these three different attacks at the same time? Although none of them were fatal, it was a good start. Since he had started, he should persevere. Guangchang was even considering how to restrict the swordsman's movements to prevent him from escaping when the situation turned bad. The three of them had the ability to withstand at least one more attack. Since they had such a foundation, why not use it? Seizing opportunities was not the ability of the swordsman alone. It was the same for Buddhist disciples. Lu Xiaoyi merged himself into the sword river to block the attacks of the three. Before he accumulated enough sword force, he should not be injured again. He was not made of iron. Although he could deal with everyone's attacks, there was a limit to it. Moreover, when he used his strength, he would not be able to avoid the attacks of the other two. He needed to take it easy. Actually, the three of them had only changed their battle attitude for 1 or 2 breaths. They had been at a disadvantage in the previous battle. Now that they finally saw hope, they turned the situation around. Was this a good change? It might be and it might not, because some people like this kind of change. Lu Xiaoyi merged with his sword river. He was going to make his move. If he failed this time, he would leave. He would go and deal with his own, but in Sparrow Palace. Whether he fought or stayed, he had to control it. This was his principle. The sword light gathered. The three of them were stunned. They had seen this familiar move countless times today, but they could not do anything about it. It was a move that relied purely on brute force. It seemed like this grandson did not know any other moves apart from this move. It was not that he did not know, but this move was the fastest, simplest, and most direct. It was most suitable for continuous attacks, and was the easiest way to break the opponent's confidence. The sword light fell. It was Zomba. It was indeed Zomba. It must be Zomba. The spectators outside could see it clearly, but the people inside could also see it clearly. The Taoist Grand Moon true fire engulfed the entire area. He did not even consider whether it would burn the Buddha's head. That shouldn't be the case, right? That golden light was so bright. Guangchang's owl flapped its wings and swooped down at an inhuman speed. It really wasn't a living creature, but a part of the guardian deity's spirit. However, in their eyes, the swordsman's sword strike this time was different from the past. In the past, he would be wandering around with his sword slashing down on his opponent's head. But this time, he and his sword were descending toward the huge golden Buddha head. It was as if a person was riding a sword, or a sword was carrying a person. The sword light split and converged into a single slash. There was such a move. Guangchang was the quickest to react. He immediately realized swordsman's intention and shouted out, "Zomba, retreat. This person wants to get close to you." Why did he get close to her? Of course, he had to finish off Zomba's last meaty bun with his sword. The advantage of doing so was that there was no pause in the middle. It was as smooth as flowing water. He would not need to spend 1 or 2 breaths to split the sword light again. The swordsman wanted to take Zomba's life. Both of them rushed forward with all their might. But since the sword light had already descended, how could they react in time? The golden Buddha head was huge and could not avoid the sword that was locked onto by the divine sense. After the sword light, the Buddha's head was smooth and smooth, no longer having those lumps on it. It looked much more pleasing to the eye. However, this could not help Lu Xiaoyi decide which one to hit with his 7 ants. He felt that there were 2 Buddha heads. It was as golden, as clean, and as shiny as a tile. There was no information that could help him determine which one was real, which one was fake. Furthermore, he did not have the time to think carefully. With the way he swung his sword, even a second was too long. How could he have the time to think? There was no need to think. It was just a gamble with a 50-50 chance. He had already lost once in the Taoist's ink painting. Could he lose again this time? With a swing of the sword, the huge Buddha head was smashed into pieces. In the intertwining light and shadow, there were no remains of a human body. There was also no Tao disappearing celestial phenomenon. In both of his choices, he chose the wrong one. Because of the smashing of the fake Buddha head, the real Buddha head instantly floated far away. This was also a small trick that Ba had designed between the real and fake Buddha heads, so that the real Buddha head could safely escape. At this moment, the grand moon primordial fire was very close to him. The owl had even pecked a huge hole in his body. Although Ba had lost everything, he had already escaped far away. If Lu Xiaoyi wanted to kill him, he needed time to escape. He also needed time to split the sword light again. In this situation, the two people behind him were risking their lives to pounce on him. How could he have time? Even if the sword light only needed 1 or 2 breaths. The situation was set. Seeing that the owl had succeeded and the grand moon primordial fire had completely covered the swordsman, this was what everyone thought. The faraway Buddha head Ba did not dare to delay. The overall situation was good, but his personal situation was not. He needed to leave temporarily to recover his bond. Thinking about it, with the swordsman's current situation, the two of them should have no problem dealing with him, right? As he thought about it, he did not relax his hands at all. He was waiting for the fake Buddha head's reaction to him to slow down a little before he teleported out. At this moment, he felt his surroundings suddenly darken. When it lit up again, something sharp had pierced through his body. Who extinguished the light? The sword light that Lu Xiaoyi had been keeping outside finally played its most important role at the most crucial moment. This time, there was no choice, and there was no luck to boost him. In the Tao disappearing celestial phenomenon, a man on fire soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace. It was Lu Xiaoyi, whose fur was burnt. The remaining 2 people, Guangchang and the Taoist, did not have the confidence to chase after him. They knew very well that their attacks, just now, were not fatal. With the swordsman's strength, how could they know that it was not another trap? The 3 of them tried their best to defend, but they still lost the most important person in a positional battle, Ba. This was very important, because among the 9 people of Heaven's choice, as long as there were 2 powerhouses in defense, the source of the Tao would be as stable as a rock. One of them was Ta Luo, and the other was Ba. Now that the 2 of them were dead, the remaining Guangchang and the Taoists were also good at guerrilla warfare. However, no matter how good they were at guerrilla warfare, how could they be better than the ancestor of guerrilla warfare, the swordsman? They still did not know that Ta Luo was dead. If they knew, they would not have let Ba take the risk to stay. But in this world, there were not so many ifs. With Ba's death, the 2 of them felt a chill in their hearts. They did not know what they would do if the swordsman came back. They had lost their will. Chapter 12:16. In reality, there wasn't much time left for them to consider. In less than 10 breaths of time, another aura fluctuation came from the direction the sword cultivator left. Even from far away, they could feel the incomparably sharp aura. They all understood. The swordsman must have his own unique way of extinguishing the fire. He must have come back to settle the score after extinguishing the fire. This guy was completely fine. At the very least, he was fine. The swordsman was the type of person who would get crazier the more he was injured. This time, he must be ruthless. Without Ba as a shield, how could he defend? The Taoist turned around and left. As the culprit behind the fire, it was obvious who the swordsman wanted to kill. There is a way to advance and retreat. I will take my leave first. Master, please do as you wish. Once he left, Guangchang did not persist. No matter how arrogant he was, the battle with the swordsman had caused him to feel a chill in his heart. There was a way to persist and give up. Who did not know how to say beautiful words? Guangchang chose a direction. He did not want to face the swordsman alone unless he had a helper. And it could not be a helper like the Taoist. What a coward. Lu Xiaoyi returned like a king. He swaggered to the source of the Tao and realized that there was no one there. This was within his expectations. This was the battle strategy. Where could he not heal? However, the best way to heal one's injuries was to heal one's injuries here. While healing, he could also attack the opponent's confidence. After this retreat, the next time they meet in battle, these two people would be in a state of extreme nervousness. It would be difficult to fight him to the death again. Of course, if the opponent did not retreat, then it would be another head-on battle, until another one died. Even if Lu Xiaoyi was made of meat, it would not be enough to burn. In the end, the one who retreated would still be him. But this kind of profound battle psychology was not understood by everyone. His injuries were not as insignificant as they appeared. Bluffing was an art. The key was to use it in the right place. Killing Zongba was a form of intimidation. This was the so-called killing to establish dominance. However, a human's memory would deteriorate, especially with the passage of time. Returning within 10 breaths is one thing. Waiting for you to return after a few moments is another. Even if you have truly recovered by then, these two may not retreat. The truth was to strike while the iron was hot. There were 3 hidden dangers in his body now. Guangchang's spiritual attack was the most time-consuming, but it was also the easiest to completely remove. Secondly, Zongba's Buddhist power was still in the process of transforming into the power of merit, so it also needed time. The fastest to subside was the Taoist's real fire, but it was also the only one that could not be completely removed. It needed to be slowly eliminated under the suppression of mana. It would be embarrassing if word got out. The self-proclaimed magical cultivation genius had lit a small flame for thousands of years. The worst part was the appearance. Even the hairy parts were gone. That was because the fire at the end was indeed fierce. As a Taoist master of fire, he definitely had the ability to do so. Healing at the source of a Tao was a small trick in the martial world. It was the simplest deception. But because it was the simplest, it was also the most difficult to grasp. Truth and falsehood were really hard to see through. From the beginning to the end, the two cultivators who were unscathed did not have the courage to provoke him. In the beginning, they were still assessing his injuries. The more they assessed his injuries, the more they felt that he had almost fully recovered after such a long time. The more time passed, the less firm their thoughts became until the other party was completely recovered. Outside the space of the Tao tablet, the Yang gods were still communicating with each other. They could clearly see the situation in the field, and there was no misjudgment. One of the Yang gods sighed. The overall situation has been decided. There's no need to watch anymore. With this swordsman here, we can't win. Even if Deadwood comes, it will be the same. Their perception was different from that of ordinary yuaning. They could go very deep into the space of the Tao tablet. In their view, the death of Ta Luo and Zongba was the reason for their defeat. Without the defense of these two people, the Heaven's chosen people could not occupy the source of the Tao. It was harder to count on Deadwood and Guangchang to defend one place. This was the view of most of the Yang gods because they did not know the existence of the matrix technique. Sensing the gazes of the junior brothers, senior brother Pang, who was the leader, smiled slightly. Victory or defeat is no longer important. What's important is the integrity of the Heaven's chosen people. Even the female cultivators of Zhou could commit suicide here. Could it be that the Heaven's chosen men are not as good as the female cultivators of Zhou? Then don't treat this battle as an ordinary competition. The people of Zhou came here with the will to die to show us their determination to resist foreign aggression. We also came back with the will to die to tell them that we, the Heaven's chosen people, have a firm belief in going out. This is not a battle, but a conversation. There is no such thing as begging for mercy and admitting defeat. The Yang gods were silent. This was also the main topic, except for the few good seedlings in the space. It was a pity. Of course, they did not know that their senior brother Pang had other ideas. Now, there were only 4 Heaven's chosen people left in the space of the Tao tablet. The dead tree should be able to wear down Hua Hu of the human sect in a long time. But the other Heaven's chosen cultivator who was fighting against the primeval Shengyuan Taoist would not be able to escape. This meant that in the final battle for the source of the Tao, the ratio of the two sides was 3-2. The Heaven's chosen people had a slight advantage, but in terms of strength, the people of Zhou Xian were probably stronger because the swordsmen could fight against two people without any pressure. The problem was the matrix technique. The Sea of Bitterness was useless in close combat, and only the 9- cube was still working. This could be seen from how difficult it was for the swordsmen to kill Zhongba. Almost every time they needed luck, luck was on the side of the Heaven's chosen people. At that time, there were only 5 Heaven's chosen people left, and their luck was already so biased. Later, when there were only 3 people left, and they had to bear the luck of 9 people, their luck would probably be even more biased. Therefore, it was still unknown who would win. The upper realm of Zhou Xian dared to call itself the #1 realm in the main world universe, and it had its own strength. To be honest, they did not want to touch such a realm, and they did not even have such thoughts. However, even if they did not have such thoughts, they still had to pretend that they did. This was how the forces of the cultivation world interacted with each other. They could not let the other party rest easy, and they had to keep him in a state of constant vigilance. This way, when they were doing things in the main world, the upper realm like Zhou Xian would not interfere and meddle in other people's business for no reason. They had to let Zhou Xian be in danger. Only then could they tuck their tails between their legs and behave themselves. Zhou Xian had Zhou Xian's way of thinking, and the Heaven's chosen people had their own calculations. It was just that when they were testing each other, both sides thought of the same thing. And this was the reason why they were here, to compare their skills. Well, basically, they could see very clearly that both sides were evenly matched. Only one swordsman was playing tricks, and he caused a ripple in the big picture. Swordsman, Senior Brother Pang sighed in his heart. This annoying orthodoxy had been annoying him recently. Every few hundred years, other than the Heaven's chosen people, there would always be swordsmen, perfected lords coming to invade. Now, the one causing trouble at the Yuanying level was still the swordsman. These shit-stirrers were really inhumane. Chapter 12:17. Under withered trees' hands, lightning struck continuously. After 2 hours, he finally turned Hua, who was difficult to deal with, into ashes. Although he had won, he had consumed a lot of energy. Moreover, he was not happy about the victory at all because this was not the victory he wanted. In terms of strength, Hua Hu of Zhou Xian's human sect was indeed much weaker than him. However, this damned Taoist tradition in the pores was too effective against the way of thunder. It was simply born to restrain thunder. It was his biggest weakness. No matter what kind of lightning he struck, the hundreds of thousands of pores on Hua Hu's body would open up, leaving him with nowhere to bite. The reason why he could win was that when he came in, a mysterious cultivator gave him a porcelain bottle that contained some kind of smoke cloud. The cultivator specifically reminded him that this thing was useless against other cultivators. Only Hua Hu of human sect, who survived by relying on his pores. It was as if the cultivator had predicted that he would encounter Hua Hu. In the end, he hit the nail on the head. Both of them were flying towards the source of Tao, so it was normal for them to bump into each other. Withered Tree wanted to kill Hua Hu to clear up the trouble in the battle for the source of Tao. However, Hua Hu's thoughts were simple. As long as he could hold Hua Hu back, he would be able to pave the way for Zhou Xian's overall victory. Personally, this cultivator from human sect was very clear about the overall situation. Thus, the two of them began to fight. They knew each other very well. Withered Tree spent half an hour trying several methods that he had figured out to deal with Hua Hu, but they were all useless. Seeing that he had dragged on for too long, he was afraid that the source of Tao would change, so he had no choice but to open the porcelain bottle. The smoke cloud in the bottle was colorless, odorless, and silent, as if it was an empty bottle. Anyway, Withered Tree did not notice anything. He truly realized the use of this thing when he saw Hua Hu's body. Previously, when he was struck by lightning, Hua Hu's body should have had close to 500,000 pores dissipating the force. However, as the battle continued, the number of pores dissipating force increased to 400,000, then 300,000. Thus, Kumu understood that the thing in the porcelain bottle was used to block the pores. The fewer pores that dissipated, the more thunder force that remained in the body. It was a very simple principle. It had to be said that this method was really simple. But because it was so simple, even a top Yuaning like him could not figure out what was in the bottle. It should have been made by a supreme, right? Whether or not this counted as cheating, there was actually no conclusion. Every cultivator who entered this place had a few powerful toys given to them by their masters and elders. It was just that the item he obtained was more targeted. Of course, Wahoo also felt the changes in his pores. He knew that his opponent had secretly done something, so he tried to resolve it. Among the enemies of the human sect, there was no lack of people who thought of this method to block his pores. Hence, he was not unfamiliar with this method. He also had many ways to clear his pores. However, after a series of attempts, he was surprised to find that none of his methods worked. Instead, it caused the pores to become more and more blocked. By the time he realized that he was in trouble, it was already too late for him to escape. The Tao of Lightning was also an orthodoxy that placed a lot of emphasis on movement. In fact, it was even more so than the swordsman. This was because the Tao of Lightning had never heard of anyone defending against lightning. They were all used to strike people, not to defend themselves. What if he didn't have any defensive skills? Hence, they could only learn from the swordsman and run. Of course, their running was different from that of the swordsman. The swordsman's flying sword had a spirit and could search for its target on its own. The lightning of the Tao of Lightning was straight and could not be controlled by the swordsman. This difference gave the cultivators of the two orthodoxies different requirements when it came to escaping. To put it simply, the swordsman could escape more unscrupulously because the spirit of the sword would help its master to control it for a short period of time. The Tao of Lightning had more restrictions. Otherwise, they would not be able to release lightning. They would not be able to control lightning. Wahoo could not outrun Withered Tree. Instead, the pores all over his body became even more blocked. After calculating the distance, he knew that he could not run to the source of Tao. He could only rely on his companions for help. Hence, he gave up and focused on perishing together with his opponent. Unfortunately, this passive method of self-destruction was not very effective. It was reasonable for his body to die and his soul to be destroyed. Withered Tree rested for a while. He was worried about the changes in the source of Tao and hurried on. In fact, he was only worried about one person. That was the swordsman's single ear. Taoist Shang Yuan, on the other hand, was in a different situation. His opponent was a rare soul cultivator. This kind of opponent did not pose much pressure to him. However, the problem was that his mysterious ability was not very effective against soul cultivators. His mysterious ability was only effective against humans. For example, some other cultivation races such as void beasts, mutated beasts, soul bodies, corpses, and so on. These races had their own mysterious abilities. They called this supernatural ability. The effect of the humans' acquired mysterious abilities against the natural instincts of these races was imaginable. In fact, it was very easy to deal with soul bodies. All it took was transcendence energy. However, this required time. Taoist Shang Yuan was firmly in control of the process. He neither took risks nor indulged. This was the standard method of orthodox Taoism. It was the foundation of Taoism's disciples, so he was not unfamiliar with it. After dealing with the soul body, he flew towards the source of Tao at a leisurely pace. He could feel that there was a fight at the source of Tao. However, this was his character. He did not think about things beyond his ability. He only wanted to deal with the trouble at hand. As for the safety of others, it was up to fate whether they lived or died. Who could save who? His mentality was the standard Taoist mentality. He was not happy with external gains or sad for himself. No matter how important the mission was, it was not as important as his view on cultivation. He would never be hot-blooded, but he would never shrink back. He was a firm believer that a journey of 1,000 miles began with a single step. He would solve the obstacles he encountered and continue his journey after solving them. He never thought about taking shortcuts. He did not think about what happened at the source of Tao. He did not think about whether his companions were in danger. He did not even think about whether it was his turn to have an epiphany. The source of Tao was filled with people from Zhou. He would walk there slowly. If it was filled with people from Heaven's Chosen, he would also fly there slowly. He had suffered a lot in his life because of his character. At the same time, he had also gained a lot. He was like a duck floating in the water. Originally, if the 5 of them met at the source of Tao, Zhou would have a high chance of winning even though there were only 2 of them. One was hot-blooded like Lu Xiaoyi, while the other was steady like a mountain. It would be easy for them to guard the source of Tao. However, because of the matrix technique, because of the excessive tilting of fate towards Heaven's Chosen, it finally affected the development of the momentum. There was a change in the unseen world. In the end, the Taoist who gave up first and advanced also retreated, bumped into Shang Yuan's direction. On the other hand, Ku Mu was in the direction of Guangchang. This was the best draw that couldn't be any better. With Shang Yuan's temper, he would only continue to move forward after moving the stones in his path. However, with the character of Heaven's Chosen Taoist, he would always move forward. When these 2 met, one would fight and the other would flee. There would be no end to it. They would not think about what would happen at the source of Tao. When Dead Tree and Guangchang, these 2 top cultivators in Heaven's Chosen mainland, bumped into each other, there was no doubt that confidence would return to them. Chapter 12:18. You're alone. This was the first thing Ku Mu and Guangchang said when they saw each other. It was such a coincidence, because Ku Mu knew that Guangchang must be with Zomba Lama, just as Pingru knew that Ku Mu must be with Ta Luo. One attacking and one defending, one moving and one defending. This was the best combination. This was also the reason why they teamed up. But now, the one moving and attacking was still there, and the one defending was gone. This was also a miracle of coincidence. Killed by the swordsman. Their second sentence was exactly the same. They were truly brothers in distress. Fortunately, the way they were killed was not the same. Everyone's joy was different, but their suffering was always the same. Ta Luo went to chase after them and was not far from me. In the end, he was unlucky and ran into that killer. I didn't have time to save him. Ku Mu was very honest. Zomba was killed right beside me. The swordsman was injured, but I think it won't affect him much. Guangchang didn't need a lie. Comparing the 2, their hearts were very heavy. This was not good. The problem was, if there were more Zhou cultivators coming, how would they deal with them? The 2 of them reported the number of people they had killed, and they finally had some confidence in their hearts. Ku Mu's side could confirm that they had killed 3 people. The combination of Chang Kong, and Hua Hu, as well as Guangchang and Zomba, had also killed 3 people. This meant that they had 6 heads in their hands. As long as the rest of them worked hard, there might only be 1 or 2 immortal Zhou left. If they were lucky, there might only be 1 left. If they were unlucky, there might only be 2 left. They were inclined to believe that there were 2 people left. This was because immortal Zhou still had a powerful character called Shang Yuan. Neither side had encountered this person yet, and it was difficult for the other cultivators to pose a threat to him. Thus, Shang Yuan and Shang Yuan should be the only 2 left. 3 against 2. I can't say that we're evenly matched. That's a little self-deceiving. I'll be honest, with that swordsman, we're probably still the weaker side. Ku Mu was very honest. Now, he didn't allow himself to be careless. This involved the Heaven's Choice continent and their own life and death. There were tens of thousands of people watching outside, so they couldn't shrink back. Both of them were very clear about this point. Guangchang nodded in agreement. But we also have a chance. Just now, I felt a weak fluctuation of spiritual vigor in a certain direction. There should be someone fighting. On the bright side, could it be that our Taoists are in cahoots with the upper primordial sect? Guangchang knew what he meant. Let's go to the Tao source now. If the swordsman is the only one there, we still have a chance. If the swordsman and Shang Yuan are both here, then we'll just fight wherever we can. We want to have the sole goal of seizing the Tao source. Is that what senior brother means? Kumu nodded. Tens of thousands of people from Heaven's Choice were looking at them. The people from Zhou could pretend to be scared, but they couldn't. This was the disadvantage of being on their home ground. What a pity. As long as either Taro or Zhongba is here, our chances will increase greatly. Guangchang shook his head with a bitter smile. In front of the swordsmen, those who play defensive positions are nothing more than live targets. The two of them slowly moved forward and communicated with each other. To the two of them, the swordsman was their greatest enemy. Because Guangchang had fought with him before, he had some understanding of him. Therefore, he told them everything he knew and tried to be as detailed as possible. They didn't have a better choice. The space in the tablet of Tao was unstable, time was limited, and that guy was occupying the Tao source. There were also countless people from Heaven's Choice watching them from outside. They still had a chance. Because the two of them were the strongest people from Heaven's Choice, Yuanying. One of them represented Taoism, while the other represented Buddhism. Knowing that Guangchang had retreated before, Kumu spoke very frankly. To be fair, the chances of winning and losing are 4 to 6, or even 5 to 5. The key is what kind of mentality we use to fight. If we still want to leave a way out, then we'll have 4 to 6, or even 3 to 7. If we don't fear death, then we'll have a 5 to 5 chance. The swordsman is also a human. He can't be invincible forever. From afar, the two of them saw the swordsman standing upright like a javelin. His Taoist robe had been changed, but there were obvious burn marks on his hair and beard. He looked a little embarrassed. However, the two of them knew that this wouldn't affect the swordsman's fighting state. The two of them stood facing each other silently. Their emotions were brewing. Kumu felt that his momentum was enough. He bowed and said, Taoist Shan is invincible. We can't fight against you alone, so we join forces. This is not the way of a cultivator, but we have no choice. I believe you can understand. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. How could a battle in the cultivation world be so fair? If you think it's fair, then it's fair. These words were just an excuse for himself to numb himself. However, he still wanted to say, Epiphany is not real. There's no such thing as if I get it. Others don't get it. It can be comprehended by one person or by others. The wider the heart, the deeper the comprehension. I'm willing to share it with others. This is the philosophy of my life as a cultivator, as long as everyone has good intentions. The instability of the Tao tablet space was very obvious. Although the space was still restrained, divine sense could penetrate it. Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi's words were not only heard by Kumu Guangchang, but also by the tens of thousands of cultivators outside the space, including the Yuanying Supremes. The attitude between Heaven's Choice and Zhou Xian has long been decided. It's not up to you, and it's not up to me. The battle between us doesn't decide anything. Not only now, but even before the competition. This kind of battle is just an excuse for the future choice. It's one of the countless hypocrisy in the cultivation world. I understand this point, and you also understand it. He pointed at the two of them. Since it's meaningless, why continue to fight? Just like the ignorant beasts in the beast fighting arena, it's just a matter of face. Tens of thousands of people are watching. You think the face of tens of thousands of people is more important than your own heart. Such a cultivator, for others to cultivate for you, it's lamentable. With a wave of his sword light, Lu Xiaoyi shouted, The swordsman's sword doesn't only kill people, but also makes friends. The wider the heart, the wider the road. Making decisions for others is not the Tao of cultivation. The sword of the one ear is here. Whether it's a friend or a foe, it's all up to you. His words spread through the entire Echo Valley. They were like a heavy hammer that struck everyone's heart. This was a provocation. This was a provocation to the high-level cultivators of Heaven's Choice, Zhou Xian, the so-called general trend of the cultivation world, and the existing order. Most of the people who heard this were neutral people who were watching the show, especially the small group of swordsmen, such as Banju, who murmured, The swordsmanship is different, but this swordsman spirit is too similar. Huang Nian's eyes also shone. Are we pursuing the swordsman spirit? Or are we just pursuing the so-called nameless tablets orthodoxy? How do you choose? The sun god didn't see the problem this way. Primeval young god's face was grave. If this is just a psychological tactic, you have to admit that his mouth is sharper than the flying sword. With a few words, the two heaven's chosen people were in a dilemma whether to fight or not. This battle is in the bag. But if, Xian Liuzi sighed, I bet that's what he's thinking. Zhou Xian's sword cultivators wouldn't think so, but what a hooligan's method, standing in front of the Tao source and speaking again. It's as if the reason in this world is his sword vein. If these two heaven's chosen people stood in front of him and said this, what do you think he would do? Primeval young god shook his head speechlessly. First of all, the two heaven's chosen people don't have the brains. Secondly, before they could say anything, the flying sword would have already come over. When the hands don't work, they use their mouths. When a mouth doesn't work, they use their hands. What should we do? Chapter 12:19. Guangchang felt that he couldn't continue thinking about it. If he did, it would be like what the swordsman said. He would have to learn from the ancient cultivators, where the three of them poured wine together to comprehend impermanence. It wasn't like turning enemies into friends. It was like living a carefree life. Even if there were thousands of people around, they would still do as they pleased. This was no longer the environment for ancient cultivators. Why are you King doing this? If you were in Zhou Xian and they were the ones saying these words, how would you King choose? You can't be such a hooligan. Moreover, he realized that the dead tree next to him seemed to be thinking too much. In this regard, the Buddhist heart was usually firmer than the Taoist heart. He didn't say much. It was useless to say anything now. He rushed forward and twisted his hand on his own head. His head was already in his hand. This was not suicide, but the most miraculous of his 9 guardian gods, the guardian god of head snatching. Head holding was an attitude. It was a bit like the military saying, if you don't succeed, you'll bring your head to me. In fact, it was a buff to himself. In this state, he could use the abilities of the other 8 guardians at will, and the power would be much higher. However, the price he had to pay was that if he didn't succeed, he would never be able to put his head back. His guardians head holding, blood holding, and clean holding. The difference was that if he first transformed into a guardian and then head holding, it would be clean holding. This state would last for a long time, up to tens or hundreds of years. As long as the target died, he would be able to put his head back. However, this kind of head holding had a limited effect on the battle, about 20% to 30%. Blood holding was just like what he was doing now. He would twist his head on his real body and then transform into a guardian. This state could increase his strength by at least 50%. The price was that he only had 2 hours. Once the 2 hours were up, he would collapse and disappear without needing to be killed. He wanted to use this method to tell the dead tree, I've done what we discussed. What about you? Seeing that Guangchang acted as promised, the dead tree sighed in his heart. He abandoned his selfish thoughts and pointed his hand. The thundercloud was about to form, but he didn't have the chance to strike because the swordsman, who kept talking about the ancient cultivators, had already swept up the flying swords in the sky. Words were words, actions were actions. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't going to give them a chance to strike after he finished his lecture. What face? What state of mind? What ancient cultivation? His life was more important. In the blink of an eye, the 3 of them came together. Thunder rumbled, and the sword chi was like a river. Under the main theme, the guardians of Guangchang appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Owls, live snakes, lion beasts, pestles, and Buddhist swords came and went. Life and death often happened in the blink of an eye, and changes were often unexpected. This was the most intense battle, but it was also the most interesting battle. Because the 3 of them were all good at evading, those with poor eyesight would not be able to keep up with their rhythm, let alone understand their tactics. There was only one word to describe it, and that was it. Without a defense-type cultivator, Everything was happening at an extremely fast pace. Attacks were often unable to be used to their fullest potential. Once they saw that they weren't doing well, they would immediately change. Once they attacked, they would immediately withdraw, and once they touched, they would disperse. It was a competition of foundations, and even more so, a competition of performance. Most importantly, it was the limit of judgment in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint. Here, plans simply couldn't keep up with changes. Everything was purely based on instinct, based on hundreds and thousands of years of experience. As they subconsciously executed their moves, each of them condensed their profound understanding of battle. It had to be said that from a technical level alone, this was Lu Xiaoyi's most hardy battle in the past 1,000 years of cultivation. It was the strength of the opponents, the evenness of the opponents, and the uncertainty of everything. He liked this kind of decisive battle, and the other two were also good at it. Only when the three of them went all out, the true essence of the battle was quietly unveiled. In the eyes of the tens of thousands of spectators, how many of them shook their heads and sighed? How many of them felt ashamed of their inferiority? And how many of them set new goals for themselves? This was a benchmark. If you couldn't reach this level, don't call yourself a strong expert. There was no trump card because every move was a trump card. There was no holding back because in the next moment, you might be powerless forever. There was no conspiracy because the extremely fast pace of the battle instinctively made your mind unable to focus on other aspects. There was no mutual destruction because every time it happened, it would be mutual destruction. Lu Xiaoyi's pre-battle mentality was shaken, but it was useless in the face of life and death. How could a top-notch Yuanying still consider such nonsense at this time? Everything was instinctive, a killing intent hidden deep in the human soul. It was a pure desire to battle. It was a desire to indulge in everything and only seek pleasure. This rhythm became faster and faster, just like the strings of a zither getting faster and faster. In the end, whoever couldn't hold on would die. Injury? This was a question that didn't need to be considered at all, because everyone was injured. Exchanging injury for life was the norm, and exchanging life for life was also normal. Everyone knew that if they didn't fight, they would die. There was no such thing as a soft-hearted person here. This was a stage for people of their level. Black Star was dazzled towards this senior brother, while before he came, he was still a junior brother. He had always felt that this person was too strange and wasn't on the right path. But now he understood. Previously, he seemed to be scheming a lot, but it was only because he hadn't met his match that he was lazy. With the strength that Single Ear had displayed, it wasn't wrong for him to call him senior brother. In fact, he could even be his martial uncle. His worry had never stopped since the beginning, and now it was getting deeper and deeper to the point that he couldn't help but open his mouth. Martial uncle, if they fight like this, won't there be too many coincidences? Changdi's expression didn't change. Cultivation is something formed by too many coincidences. Without coincidences, there is no cultivation. In a battle, you have to look at the essence. What is the essence of their battle? Can you see it? Black Star was stunned. Essence? Sword? Lightning? Buddha? Cultivation? Tao Realm? None of them. Changdi smiled. He was really not worried, because everything was going according to the swordsman's rhythm. In such a battle, everything else is secondary. The most important thing is willpower. Without a battle heart that has been tempered, you won't be able to hold on for long. It's not something that can be done with hot-bloodedness. The foundation of willpower is the spirit. It's not about the strength of your spirit, but the refinement. It's like an old vine, tenacious within. Yuchang nodded. He was even more direct. Among the three of them, Guangcheng's fighting style is the most hot-blooded. This doesn't seem to be in line with what Buddhists have always pursued. It's not what it looks like, and it can't last long. I think he'll be the first to give up. Kumu, this person's lightning technique is very impressive. Many perfected lords can't do it. He's not just hot-bloodedness. In such a battle, he knows how to restrain himself because he's worried. What's so scary about a worried lightning cultivator? Lightning techniques should be hot-blooded in the first place. Look at your senior brother. He's just acting. He looks like he's going to charge forward bravely, but he's actually very calm from the start. He's not hot-blooded or numb. He's not rash or reserved. That's because such a battle is the most ordinary way of fighting for a swordsman. When you're already used to fighting like this, what's there to be excited about? It's just one of the countless times you'll die. The excitement on his face was just to make his opponents excited as well. You have to know that excitement can't last long. There's bound to be a moment of weakness. Chapter 12:20. The young gods of Heaven's choice had different opinions. A young god who knew him, well, secretly sent a message. Senior Brother Pang, it seems that the gathering of providence from the 9 reduced square matrix technique didn't completely appear in the battle. Senior Brother Pang sighed. Yes, this swordsman is also a capable person. He couldn't resist the matrix technique, so he simply merged his providence with his opponents. This way, everyone will be on par, and no one will be able to take advantage of the other. It's a very clever method. The young god was surprised. How did he know that the Heaven's Choice Association used the matrix technique? Senior Brother Pang snorted. Of course he didn't. But such a smart cultivator, if he couldn't see through the obvious providence bias in the previous few times, then he doesn't deserve to stand here. Why do you think he said those words before the battle? Ancient cultivation, state of mind, sharing, and going forward despite millions of people are all nonsense. He used those words to temporarily shake his opponent's mind. Even if it was only for a moment, it was enough for him to merge his providence with his opponent's. The fusion of providence requires a prerequisite, and the prerequisite is that both sides have reached an agreement on a certain point of view. Therefore, I dare say that the two of us, the nascent soul stage cultivators of the Heaven's chosen stage, were shaken when we heard his bullish asterisk key. Even if we reacted immediately, it was already too late. The young god was a little speechless. This guy's too cunning, isn't he? Senior Brother Pang sighed. I'm afraid that this hooligan is cultured. The young god was silent for a moment. There is such a person in Zhou Xian, and his sword vein is unfathomable. Senior Brother Pang sneered. Zhou Xian's sword cultivator, my ass. How could a cultivation soil like the immortal of Zhou upper realm nurture such a person? Only fertile soil produces grain, and sand only produces melons. The young god's eyes lit up. Senior Brother, then we. Senior Brother Pang shook his head. We don't know anything. Don't worry about him. This is a big problem, and it's inauspicious to touch him. This kind of person is best left to Zhou Xian and the others to deal with. Why are we acting recklessly? Don't let us get our hands dirty when the time comes. The high-intensity battle continued for several minutes, but there were still no signs of it slowing down. Even if someone wanted to slow down, the frenzied river of swords would not cooperate at all. It was as if the battle had only just begun. When someone was still immersed in this crazy rhythm, the other two had no choice but to follow closely, not daring to relax in the slightest. Guangchong and Dead Tree could also choose to leave temporarily and come back after some rest. However, if they did that, the previous battle would be meaningless. Moreover, with Guangcheng's victory, there was no reason for him to relax. His face might belong to others, but his head was his. Therefore, they continued, and some of them couldn't keep up with the pace. The sword light was still berserk, but the calmness displayed in the midst of the berserk was the most terrifying. Everyone was an expert, but there were professionals and amateurs among them. For example, in Guangchong, how many times had he fought with his head on the line? Unlike a certain someone who had been in this rhythm ever since he picked up the sword. This was the biggest difference between them. Some people were pretending to be iron-blooded, while some people were iron-blooded by instinct. After a period of intense clashes, the differences between the two sides finally began to show. Lu Xiaoyi had no intention of holding back. From the beginning, he had made it clear that he didn't mind sharing. However, since he didn't want to give face, he wouldn't ask again. Yuaning cultivators should be responsible for their own choices. Guangchang Bodhisattva began to exert his strength again. This time, it was different from the beginning. This time, he was fighting with his life on the line. He had no choice but to fight because he only had 2 hours left. Now, there was less than half an hour left. There wasn't much time left for him. Relatively speaking, Dead Tree was different from him. The differences between Buddhism and Taoism were gradually revealed after a period of intense fighting. Just like the persistence in the bones of Buddhism, the Buddha's body was ignited. The Taoist nature was to go with the flow and not fight against the general trend. Moreover, Dead Tree didn't think that fighting with his life on the line was meaningful. He had already fought with his life on the line and used all his means. What was the point of repeating it again? He would only leave more loopholes in front of the swordsman. After all, a battle between cultivators required their own strength as the foundation. It wasn't something that could be resolved by clenching one's teeth. If one's strength wasn't up to par, there was no point in clenching one's teeth. His current awkwardness was that he had no way of retreating. He didn't even know where to hide. The monk didn't need to think anymore. There was no place for him to hide. However, he actually had more choices. Only after the battle did he understand the value of the swordsman's first few sentences. Dead Tree was still cooperating, just like before. However, there were some subtle changes in his cooperation now. He was more concerned about his own safety in his actions, instead of being hot-blooded and brainless. It looked like he was accompanying the monk on his last journey. It was a little tragic, a little helpless. However, if one wanted to fight against the general trend, this seemed to be the inevitable outcome. If they had changed the scene, the environment, and the atmosphere, the two of them wouldn't have come looking for trouble with the swordsman. After several battles, they were well aware of the level of each other. In cultivation, the most taboo thing was to force things. The result wouldn't be good, just like now. At their level, the so-called backup plan, the so-called comeback, and the so-called fighting to survive from the jaws of death were nothing but jokes made by the ignorant. They would never be careless. A truly powerful cultivator would never be careless, let alone this cold-blooded swordsman. Guangchang's life on the line began to repeat itself. After all, a person's energy was limited, and their trump cards were limited as well. It was impossible to come up with new ideas all the time. It would only become more and more repetitive. When you started to repeat your so-called life on the line technique, the opponent would be able to predict your moves first. Naturally, an opportunity would appear, and the swordsman was the best at seizing opportunities. His injuries were worsening. Even with the 9 statues guardian gods, they were still on the same level. They weren't true gods, so they couldn't be hurt. His head was bleeding less and less. When the blood ran out, it would be the end of his life. The monk should be grateful to the swordsman. If the swordsman had escaped to buy time, he wouldn't even have the chance to struggle. At the very least, the swordsman had provided him with a chance to vent his anger. Withered Tree saw everything clearly from the side. From the beginning to the end, it didn't escape his eyes. He had made the wrong choice from the start, and the result was still a mistake. This was the consequence of going against the trend. He suddenly felt that the sword cultivator's words were very reasonable. Although it was a little shameless, as a cultivator, he should have this ability. He had to learn to use the great principles and the demeanor of an ancient cultivator to find a way out for himself. There were also various ways to be cowardly, and some of them were even very high and mighty. While he was distracted, the Bodhisattva of Guangchang walked to the end. He just watched quietly. It was a pity, but that was all. Chapter 12:21. Lu Xiaoyi was also heavily injured, but no one dared to doubt his current combat power. An injured swordsman was even scarier. This was no joke. He stopped attacking, and Kumu also slowly retreated. He finally decided to act according to a cultivator's instinct. Even if another cultivator from Heaven's Choice won against Shang Yuan, their combined strength would still be no match for the swordsman. This was not the rhythm of the battle. Moreover, how could they win? He did not go far. Since the swordsman continued to occupy the source of the way, he would not run away. This was a cultivator's sense of propriety. Not long after, a determined aura flew over. Shang Yuan was not in a hurry. However, the scene in front of him still surprised him. He did not expect the swordsman to have settled everything before he arrived. He looked at Kumu not far away. Senior Shan, congratulations on occupying the source of the way. I have been advancing alone. What advice do you have for me? Among the 9 cultivators, there was no difference in status. However, at the end of the battle, everyone knew who contributed the most. Thus, there was no need to say much about who was in charge. Shang Yuan had killed 3 cultivators from Heaven's Choice along the way, but he did not meet any of the top cultivators. Kumu, Guangchang, Ta Luo. Of course, he knew who killed these people. Thus, his words implied that as long as Lu Xiaoyi did not go overboard, he would say whatever he wanted. This was the way to get along with each other. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Heaven's Choice only has Kumu left. He is powerless to reverse the situation. I will not go overboard. What do you think, Senior Shan? Shang Yuan smiled. If he could discuss, he was a partner. Leaving a way out for the great Tao is what cultivators of my generation should do. Why don't we invite him to sit down together? He was also a profound person. Kumu did not refuse. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, there was no risk. He had missed the first time, so he should not miss the second time. In a battle of Tao, if you did not understand what it meant, then you could only walk the path to the end. Cultivation, on the other hand, was an art of compromise. Not only were they tired of fighting and uninterested, even the audience was tired of watching. Now, they needed something new to make up for it. For example, a family of cultivators? Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't be ruthless enough to kill the last one, and so would Shang Yuan. The dead tree also finally reacted. The competition between the positive and negative spaces had already ended. After the fight, it was time to show the concept of the positive and negative spaces as a family. No matter how hypocritical this was, it was a proper cultivation practice. Therefore, of course, they had to sit together. This was not shameful. Who would dare to say that he was shameful to be able to stand until now? Unfortunately, Guangchang did not understand this logic. Outside the space of the Tao tablet, the young gods of both sides stood up in tacit understanding. They paid their respect from afar and joined their arms in joy. This kind of result was acceptable. After all, leaving behind too many seeds of hatred was something that neither side wanted to see. What they wanted was mutual respect and recognition, not hostility. Zhou is indeed the #1 cultivation realm in the main world. My heavenly selection is far inferior to yours. Senior Brother Pang was unusually sincere. Only one branch. The rest are mediocre, small skirmishes. How can it represent the strength of the whole? The heavenly selection continent is full of heroes, each outstanding in their own way. In terms of the whole, Zhou is far inferior. Xian Liuzi was very modest. The two laughed loudly and raised their cups together, indicating to the tens of thousands of heavenly selection cultivators. Below, there was also a timely round of applause. This was etiquette. You could ignore it, you could disdain it in your heart, but you could not show it. Otherwise, you would be slapping the big shots in the face, and there would be consequences. The future development of the heavenly selection and Zhou Xian's relationship depended on this diplomatic trip, but also depended on this diplomatic trip. Both sides were constantly in contact with each other, learning each other's secrets. As for the final decision, how could it be decided by a group battle between Yuanian cultivators? It was just an appetizer before the main meal. In fact, from the beginning, there were such signs. The Yuanian cultivators fought fiercely, but the Supremes played it down. What did this in itself mean? It meant that it would not end well. Inside the Tao tablet space, Lu Xiaoyi felt that the Tao source of the impermanence Tao tablet was about to collapse. He turned to the other two. I still say the same thing about Epiphany. It's not a material object, so why should we enjoy it alone? If tens of thousands of people see the three of us eating alone, the future walking heavenly selection will be smacked with a brick. So, instead of enjoying it alone, it's better to enjoy it in a group. Why don't we use the 3 of our names to invite those who are interested to share it? It's up to whoever gets the epiphany. Without the foundation of this epiphany, You'll be the only one who can't get the epiphany. Shang Yuan said calmly, "Good idea. My Zhou Xian cultivators came with a desire for peace. We'll make friends, progress together, and improve together. The past is a new era, but it's not for each other. Shang Yuan is untalented, but I'm willing to invite fellow Taoists with senior brother." Taoist Kumu sighed in his heart. This swordsman, he couldn't be hostile. Strength was secondary. If he cultivated diligently, there was still a chance to catch up. But this person's wisdom was truly unrivaled. In any case, it was him. Whether he lived or died, he was justified. He killed people without karma, and he even left people applauding him. Look at him. He was truly a street gangster, and you couldn't refuse him. Otherwise, you'd be condemned by everyone. He also stood up and said heroically, "It's my wish. I don't dare to ask you." The three of them stood up and formed a circle. They bowed deeply to the tens of thousands of onlookers outside the space. It was like a New Year's play in a remote village. After the play was over, regardless of whether they were red or white faces, clowns or scholars, they all had to stand together and thank everyone for their support. Amidst the noise, Lu Xiaoyi raised his magic power and made the stone tremble. Heaven's chosen deadwood, Zhou Shang Yuan Shang Yuan Shang Yuan Shang Yuan, sincerely invites all friends to enter the Tao steel space together to experience impermanence. The gifts of the Tao of heaven belong to those who are virtuous. The encounters of humanity belong to those who are fated to share. In this flourishing world, we wish all fellow Taoists, regardless of the positive or negative space, and regardless of their realm, longevity. We only wish for the prosperity of human cultivation and the prosperity of the cultivation of the universe. We sincerely invite you. The deadwood beside him sighed. He even put his name at the beginning. Although he was indeed the master, it wasn't good to shift the blame like this, right? He finally understood that this swordsman was a slippery person. What he liked most was to push others to the front after causing trouble, while he himself pretended that nothing had happened. But there was nothing he could do. Just by looking at the cheers of the cultivators outside, he knew how popular this proposal was. After enjoying the feast of the eyes, he could have some practical epiphany. Was there anything better than this? As for the killings in the past, except for a few close friends who had died, who would deliberately remember? In a cultivation world, which day didn't people die? Even if there wasn't the killing of the Tao steel space, there were other forms of killing. This was a battle of Tao, not involving cause and effect. In the end, they even shared the precious epiphany opportunity with everyone. Even the most vengeful people had to give these two Zhou Xian people a thumbs up. The young gods didn't say anything. For some reason, some bold and impatient people went at first. As soon as there was a beginning, there was immediately a follow-up. When tens of thousands of people squeezed in, not to mention young gods, even half immortals couldn't stop them. Chapter 1222. This might be the first scene of epiphany in history. Although there were many people, they all knew the rules. After all, they were all at least Yuaniing realm cultivators. They knew when they could cause trouble and when they had to follow the rules. If they tried to cause trouble now, they would immediately be beaten to ashes. Therefore, with the Tao source at the center, Lu Xiaoyi and the other two at the center, a human ball formed by tens of thousands of people crowded together. They were afraid that if they were too far away, they wouldn't be able to comprehend the last essence of the impermanence realm. There weren't many people left outside, including those who fought in the first two rounds, Zhou Xian and Yuanying. They were actually the fastest to enter. Shouldn't they get some benefits after working so hard? The people left outside were basically all perfected monarchs, and they were still a little hesitant. Xian Liuzi laughed dryly. He did not avoid the topic of heaven's choice and said to the person behind him, "Since it's a gift from the master of heaven's choice, you all can do as you wish." After he said that, most of the Zhou Xian perfected monarchs also ran in. There were also a few who didn't feel anything about the impermanence great Tao. Senior Brother Pang also said to the people behind him, "In heaven's choice, we are the masters. But in the space of the impermanence Tao tablet, cultivators from Zhou Xian are the masters. Don't be embarrassed. Whether it's soup or bones, you have to taste it to know. Many perfected monarchs also ran in, but there was one thing. None of the Yang God perfected monarchs moved. This wasn't because they were respecting their status, but because there was really no need to. Xian Liuzi was secretly stabbed by senior brother Pang, but he was not angry. His expression was normal as he mocked himself. He said self-deprecatingly, "The juniors nowadays are amazing. We seniors set up the stage, but they let the little ones perform? They didn't even ask for permission in advance. They have no rules at all. When we go back, we must punish them." His words were obviously dissatisfied, but in fact, he was protecting them. In this way, Heaven's choice couldn't lose face. As for the punishment when they went back, the emperor was far away. Who knew? Senior brother Pang waved his hand. Only disciples with their own opinions are promising. The fact that your region has such a talent is a sign of great prosperity. If it were me, I wouldn't even have time to reward him. From this, we can see the depth of Zhou Xian's talents. It is a blessing for the cultivation world to have such a peace-loving domain like yours. Xian Liuzi shook his head repeatedly. A black sheep, an unruly disciple. Within the domain, he had also caused everyone to be restless. It's not that I have my own opinions, it's just that I'm a loose cultivator and am used to being wild. I have to thank fellow Taoist Heaven's choice for being tolerant. The two of them were empty against empty, empty against empty. None of them spoke the truth. Time passed. Gradually, the space of the impermanence Tao tablet began to rapidly collapse. From faintly discernible, it became visible to the naked eye, and finally, a large area collapsed. Most of the cultivators squeezed inside were waiting silently. Silence should be the main theme at this moment. However, there were also some who could not keep their mouths shut. If it were anyone else, they would have been scolded to keep quiet. However, this person was different. He was the host. 10,000 people comprehending at the same time. What a grand scene. After this, the harmony between the positive and negative spaces has increased. As the days of cultivation go on, people become distant. Fellow Taoist Kumu, how many years has it been since you've been in close contact with someone like this? The one who spoke was the swordsman. Kumu had no choice but to answer, although he actually wanted to be like everyone else, calmly waiting. To be honest, ever since I established my Tao foundation, I haven't been close to anyone. Even my family and friends often remain within the range of the thunder. This is a good habit for survival, but it's not necessarily a good habit for cultivation. If people no longer trust each other, this is also a disaster for cultivation. This was a good answer. Lu Xiaoyi appreciated this very much. This Lei Mengshi had killed many people in the space, but this should not be a reason for hatred. If this was really the case, then the most hated person in the space should be him, Lu Xiaoyi. When I was young and had yet to enter the Tao, my hometown was good for bathing. There was a hot spring. Men and women entered in shabby clothes. Under the steam of the spring water, they faced each other naked. There was no separation between them, as if the distance between people was much closer. Later on, I understood that it wasn't a matter of wearing clothes or not, but that when everyone faced each other in the primitive times, naturally, some things were no longer there. Status, wealth, distance, gratitude, and grudges. This layer of clothes is not easy to get rid of, because there will always be people who wrap themselves in ice. But if you don't let go of yourself, how can you let enlightenment take over your body? I see that among the 100 people here, 99% of them are wearing clothes. Since you are wearing clothes, why did you come here? People choose enlightenment, and enlightenment also chooses people. If tens of thousands of people were enlightened at the same time, the flower of Tao would appear. In the future, it would be a grand event in history. Otherwise, it would just be a private enlightenment, not the Tao. Lu Xiaoyi's words resonated with many people. Although there were tens of thousands of people gathered here, if this was the case, the number of people who could comprehend the impermanence Tao would be very limited. This involved many factors, including one's own internal factors and also external factors. If there were too many people, they would disturb each other, which was also a very important reason. Therefore, when the cultivators of the distant past gave lectures, after several years or dozens of years, there would be a phenomenon, and the Tao would appear. In fact, it was because the audience and the host had reached a resonance. Everyone comprehended the Tao together, and this was the flower of Tao. This was the essence of Tao. Of course, no one was giving a lecture right now, but this was the final radiance of the Tao source. If everyone could trust each other, put aside their differences, let go of their grudges, and let go of their grudges, their minds would be purer and they would be more unified. Then they might be able to form the flower of Tao. There was always a direction, a goal. If the flower of Tao really did form, it would help everyone increase exponentially. Only then would it truly be worthy of an epiphany. As soon as these words were spoken, Dead Tree was filled with deep veneration. Fellow Taoist, you speak too highly. I, Dead Tree, am insignificant. I cannot control others, but I can control myself. He did as he said. He removed all defenses and no longer thought about counterattacking after being attacked. He didn't worry about whether or not someone had ulterior motives. In terms of actions and mentality, he completely emptied himself, as if he were at his own mountain gate, his own cave dwelling. Shang Yuan also bowed deeply. Senior apprentice brother, I am inferior to a true Taoist. I will follow your lead and accomplish a magnificent feat together. They were all cultivators who had attained the Tao. There were some words that didn't need to be said. They all understood in their hearts and knew how to make a choice. There were those who followed, those who showed selflessness, and those who were impulsive. Gradually, when the majority of the cultivators shed the layer of clothing covering their hearts, there were still a few who didn't take it seriously and were vigilant. When they saw the strange gazes of people they didn't know looking at them, they had no choice but to let go of their guard. Following the crowd was a very important quality for humans. If it was used in the wrong place, it could bring disaster to the world. If it was used in the right place, it could move the hearts of the people. In this kind of situation, the gazes of the people around them could really kill. When the tens of thousands of cultivators tore away the layer of barriers and exposed themselves to each other, unknowingly, some kind of special change occurred in the dark. The return of the Tao source, the epiphany, was coming. Chapter 1223. This should have been the final radiance of an ordinary Tao tablet before it was annihilated. But because of Lu Xiaoyi's words, it was different. It didn't mean that every time tens of thousands of people did this, there would be a difference. But if no one had done this before, it would have been impossible for there to be such a coincidence. The harmony of the positive and negative space cultivators was the first time in millions of years that something could have happened. This was the magic of the Tao. It really was a flower that bloomed in every cultivator's heart. The leaves were divided into yin and yang, the roots of the 5 elements. The inside was divided into chaos, the creation of good fortune. Space was unbound, time flowed. Karma entangled one's body, the impermanence of samsara. Destiny was entrusted, the beginning of morality. Beneath the thunder, the origin of nirvana. Ethereal, nirvana rebirth. It played out all kinds of pre-celestial Taos, but the roots were impermanence. It seemed like only an instant, but it also seemed like 1,000 years had passed. The flowers bloomed, and the flowers bloomed. The Tao Tablet's remnant essence was long gone. Everyone's gains were in their hearts. It wasn't something to be compared. If you thought it was worth it, then it was worth it. After a long time, a cultivator regained his composure. He deeply bowed towards the center of the crowd and floated away. He didn't wait for the sun god to speak, nor did he wait for the event to end. His interest had been exhausted, and he had to leave. Senior apprentice Brother Pang pretended to be jealous. Fellow Taoist, I think that the seat of heaven's choice should be given to you, Zhou Xian. You killed people and still retracted your heart. You really didn't leave any leeway for others. Cien Liuzi bitterly smiled. If he was a true monarch, I would have stopped him. But it's just a trifling yuanying, right? Young people don't understand. But fellow Taoists shouldn't blame him. He killed too many people in the Tao tablet space and was afraid of being remembered. That's why he did this, right? In fact, his cultivation is still too low. Rather than trying to win people's hearts in the space, it's better to obediently listen to your teachings in front of fellow Taoists. I'm afraid it's more practical. Senior apprentice Brother Pang smiled. Fellow Taoist, you don't need to provoke me. My heaven's choice is so great that it's not something an ordinary person can imagine. How could I do such an unbearable thing for some yuanying? Come, the competition is over. It's time for the banquet. Just as that little cultivator said, friendship comes first and competition comes second. Now that the competition is over, it's time for us to catch up. The perfected sovereigns were having a big gathering, while the yuanying below were having a small gathering. Of course, the tens of thousands of spectators had already left. Those who stayed behind to accompany them were the direct descendants of the central Yang god. The situation was rather awkward. It wasn't like the battle between true monarchs where no one died, and everyone kept their dignity. In the yuanying class, everyone had suffered heavy casualties. Zhou Xian aside, only 11 of the 27 yuanying were still alive. Most of the yuanying of the Heaven's Choice had something to do with the cultivators who had died in battle. After all, the main ones who stood out were the countries that these Yang gods belonged to. It could be said that these two groups of people were mortal enemies that could not be forgiven. Trying to completely erase this grudge with just the appearance of the Tao flower was underestimating the memory of humans. Therefore, they all sat upright and were clearly divided. They all knew that now wasn't the time to settle scores, and they really couldn't bring themselves to talk to each other. Therefore, they all talked among themselves to get rid of this awkward situation. Before coming, Lu Xiaoyi was just one of the 27 yuanying. But now, he had become the center of yuanying. Everyone wanted to know what had happened in the Tao tablet space. How did Zhou Xian's fellow disciples die? Some things could be said, and some things could not be said. For example, the matter of Lu Yi couldn't be said. Tarot couldn't represent all the people of the Heaven's Choice. He had to be clear about this. Every world had people who didn't know how to cross the line. As the general situation became more and more chaotic, there would be more and more people like this. The last thing he should do was to label them and tell them where they came from. Being black-bellied was a dangerous tendency. In his heart, he was still thinking about what he had gained this time. There was no need to talk about the purple clear. It was a great harvest. Close to 10,000 strands of purple clear was enough for him to do something. At least he didn't have to think about going to the universe to gather spiritual opportunity. This was a kind of torture for him. The key was still the impermanence Tao. Because of the appearance of the Tao flower, he had obtained what he wanted. In terms of swordsmanship, he was never inferior to anyone. This was the confidence of nearly 1,000 years. There was no doubt. But in terms of the Tao realm, it was a little difficult to achieve success in all 36 Khanate Taos at the same time. He might be a genius, but he was only a genius in swordsmanship. He wasn't a genius in all aspects. In terms of the Tao realm, he had already mastered 6. The 5 elements: massacre, merit, destiny, taishu, and stars. Among the cultivators of the yuanying level, he was a rare existence. But this didn't mean that he was a genius in the Tao realm. It was just a coincidence, his own hard work and the spur of his nascent soul. Among the tens of thousands of cultivators at that time, in terms of preparation for the impermanence Tao, he was definitely one of the most well-prepared. But if one considered the different treatment for each person, he might not be among the luckiest few. He had a clear understanding of this. The cultivation world was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. In terms of battle, he could surpass everyone. But in terms of Tao realm, he didn't know his own limits. He was blindly arrogant and full of himself. He had been able to walk until now because he had never been full of himself. He always took one step at a time and reflected on himself from time to time. That was why he had the Tao flower suggestion. It was just a flash of inspiration, but he felt that it would definitely succeed. Because of all the coincidences, he only needed to go with the flow. This was a very precious quality of a cultivator. He knew what to do at the right time. He didn't have to do it deliberately. When all the factors came together, he only needed to give it a little push in that direction. The right time, the right place, the right people, they all had it. He didn't care what others obtained, and no one would talk to you about these things. The same Tao flower of impermanence was different in everyone's eyes. Some saw it as a rose, some as a peony, and some as a dog's tail flower that couldn't die. Only when the flowers were dazzling could the grass not have horses' hooves. In his eyes, impermanence was his impermanence. It was his deep understanding of changes in his nearly 1,000 years of cultivation. It was the summary of the experiences of many predecessors and elders. It was the daily analysis and understanding of the fragments of the impermanence Tao in his sea of consciousness. Finally, there was the Tao flower here. It formed the impermanence Tao that was only for him. He believed that very few people valued impermanence as much as he did, because they didn't understand the significance of impermanence in battle. Just like what he used in his final battle with Ku Mu and Guang Chong. It was actually a variant of impermanence. It was just that a Tao realm like impermanence would never be directly displayed. It wouldn't allow him to escape faster, nor would it make his flying sword sharper. But in the battle between the three of them, he, who had a certain foundation of impermanence, easily had the last laugh. Ku Mu definitely didn't understand. His defeat was somewhat inexplicable, and he didn't know what to do. This was impermanence. Chapter 12:24. The boring banquet came to an end in awkwardness, faster than Lu Xiaoyi had imagined. Perhaps the sun gods couldn't continue to flatter each other like this. From beginning to end, there was no contact between the Yuanying, as if there was an invisible wall. Xian Liuzi gathered everyone together. The overall situation of the mission has been decided, and the results are in line with expectations. It's even better than what we had imagined before we came. It's all thanks to everyone's hard work and those Tao friends who died in battle. You are all meritorious officials, and when you return to Zhou Xian, you will all be rewarded. Let's not talk about this first. There's still some things that need to be dealt with, and it will take time, about 10 years. I won't deny that this time was also deliberately fought for by us. The purpose is to give you the opportunity to go to the various countries of the Heaven's Choice continent to see more, walk around more, make friends, or find a Tao companion. The purpose is to fully understand the mindset of the small and medium-sized countries of Heaven's Choice and their views on the future of Heaven's Choice. If there is a change, how will they determine their position? The meaning of Xian Liuzi's words was very clear. The Supremes were in charge of the large countries, which were the countries with the innate tablets. The Yuanying were in charge of the small countries, which were the small and medium-sized forces that relied on the tablets. To be honest, our manpower is a bit tight, but we can't have the best of both worlds. If there were more people at the beginning, the scale of the competition would be bigger and more uncontrollable. Therefore, we can only ask everyone to work harder, to walk around more, don't stay in one place. With Echo Valley as the center, we will radiate out in more than 10 directions, and each disciple will be in charge of one direction. In these 10 years, we will have to come into contact with at least 5 countries' Heaven's Choice cultivators, and only then can we gather a relatively credible result. It will be very difficult, but this is our responsibility here, because you are outstanding enough. The sect will remember you, and Zhou Xian will remember you. Your selfless dedication will bring at least 10,000 years of peace to Zhou Xian. This is our glory. Xian Liuzi was very good at stirring up emotions. Although he talked for a long time, he didn't promise anything. To him, the trip to Heaven's Choice was originally an opportunity, and many people wanted to come but couldn't. How many people would fall for his trick? No one knew. Anyway, on the surface, everyone was the same. Their blood was boiling, and they didn't care about life and death. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. As for who was really on steroids and who was just pretending, who could say for sure? Liu Xiaoyi believed that he was not the only one among the 11 people who looked like him. As for complaining in his heart, he was not the only one. Xian Liuzi changed the topic. Regarding the risks of heaven's choice, I will also be honest. For us cultivators, where is there no risk? If you go back to Zhou Xian and travel through the origin world, would there be no danger? Not necessarily, right? It was the same for heaven's choice. There is no danger from the government. At least we are still in the diplomatic stage. You are representing Zhou Xian. You are the emissaries. You are protected and treated well. It can even be said that you are privileged in some aspects. But I want to remind you to use your privileges carefully. You are all smart people, and you know what I mean. There is still a risk. The risks come from the normalized competitions and conflicts in the heaven's choice world of cultivators, as well as the friends and family of the cultivators killed by you in the competitions. This was something that couldn't be completely stopped, even though the Great Empire Alliance had already issued an order for reconciliation. This is the cultivation world. Cultivators have never been obedient and law-abiding citizens. Xian Liuzi waved his hand and said with a heroic attitude, cultivators should be fearless. They should not be afraid of danger. They should be responsible. Several hundred years later, when you reach another level and look back on today, you won't blame me for giving you such a difficult mission. Instead, you will thank me for providing you with such a rare opportunity for your cultivation world. Direction. Let's wait and see. What I can do for you in the real world is to strictly keep the direction you choose to travel in secret. Among the people who came with you in Zhou Xian, apart from yourselves, only I know where you choose to go. I even allow you to change your direction if you feel danger during this process. Or you can simply come back. It had to be said that as a leader, Xian Liuzi completely embodied his temperament. Although he was very cunning and very hypocritical, he was very responsible and responsible. He then pointed at Liu Xiaoyi and Shang Yuan. The two of you can reject this mission and stay in the station. If you want to go out for a walk out of personal interest, I won't stop you. However, you don't need to report to anyone, including the elders of your sex and us, the leaders of the sun gods. No one had any objections. Everyone knew that the two of them had killed too many heaven's chosen people, so the risk was far greater than others. If they were to show their faces in front of tens of thousands of cultivators, whether it was those who held grudges or those who just wanted to test their skills, there would definitely be an endless stream of people coming after them. There was a limit to one's strength. If they were in such a situation in someone else's territory, they would not be far from death. No matter how outstanding they were only yuanying. There were perfected cultivators above and traps below. It was impossible to guard against. After the arrangements were made, Xian Liuzi swept a glance at everyone. Early or late, everyone had their own thoughts. He did not need to be too careful and left it to fate. Xiao Yao Yu and the other three gathered together again. Black Star was just about to open his mouth when he was stopped by the Chong flute. Don't tell us that it's not just you, but also one ear. Your actions are completely independent. We completely agree with Senior Brother Xian Liuzi's suggestion and will not interfere. Tomorrow, the two of us will go to different countries of Heaven's choice. This time, under special circumstances, we have to make special arrangements. Don't meddle in other people's affairs and take care of yourselves. In an unfamiliar environment, in an unfamiliar cultivation country, danger was everywhere. The only thing they could do was to minimize the range of their whereabouts. In any case, there would be no reinforcements here, so it did not matter if the diplomatic mission knew or not. Daoist Yu Chuan left behind a sentence. The most dangerous competition has passed. Every cultivator who contributed has the right to enjoy the fruits of victory. However, the prerequisite is that you have to survive first. Take care of yourselves. Liu Xiaoyi appreciated this kind of action. It was very humane. They were responsible for their own lives. They did not count on others, and they did not blame others. He had obtained a very detailed map of the Heaven's Choice continent from his martial uncles. Just from his point alone, it was much more convenient than the main world. In the main world star map, small sects would only have the range of their own universe. Large forces might have the knowledge of dozens of nearby universes. Any further, and they would not be able to do it in detail. This was the limit of the universe's void. However, the Heaven's Choice continent was different. In the end, it was just a continent. Even if it was very large, there were laws to follow. Here, maps were not strategic materials. Many cultivators could buy them. The continent was right there. No one could fake it, and there was no need to. To outsiders, it was very important. Chapter 1225. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi also wanted to go out. How could he stay in a place like Echo Valley for more than 10 years? It wasn't for traveling. The most important thing about traveling was to relax. If you were paranoid all day, guarding against sneak attacks and mischief, you wouldn't be able to appreciate the local customs, history, and culture. If your heart wasn't calm and your eyes weren't clear, you wouldn't be able to see the essence of life hidden under the ordinary. He was searching with his own goals. There was nothing to hide because he felt that in this mysterious land, he would probably take the most important step on the path of cultivation. He opened the map. This was the largest map he had ever seen in his life. There were tens of thousands of countries. It was dizzying. The map was very clear and carefully labeled. It was the most complete and most authoritative official product of the Heaven's Choice mainland. The entire map was divided into 3 colors. If there were more, it would seem messy. This was just right. There were 36 green pieces, representing countries with innate tablets. Next was yellow. There were nearly 1,000 colored pieces, representing countries with famous Hotian Daos. Finally, there were 8,000 to 9,000 white pieces, representing the most common unorthodox tablets in the Heaven's Choice mainland. Of the 36 cyan kingdoms, 6 of them were gray. If one looked closely at the labels, they would realize that these were the kingdoms of morality, destiny, merit, void, slaughter, and impermanence. These were the kingdoms where the great Daos of morality, destiny, merit, virtue, void, slaughter, and impermanence were. What he was looking for was. His divine sense flashed across the map. At the border of the map, there was a small red dot at the border of the immemorial sacred beast region. He couldn't tell if it was a country or a sacred beast region. He sent his divine sense in. The label was very simple, nameless tablet. The reason he could find this location so quickly was because of the information left behind by Taoist Sanda and Huang Yin's guidance. It was indeed inconspicuous. Lu Xiaoyi stared at it for a long time, his heart filled with emotions. He didn't know who set up this nameless Sword Dao tablet. He hadn't been in the sect for hundreds of years, so there were many things he didn't know. Although Martial Uncle Me had told him a lot, he wasn't a member of Xianyuan. Time was limited, so it was impossible for him to teach him everything. But from the fight with Huang Yin, he knew that this Sword Dao tablet was probably set up by the swordsman in Xianyuan. As for who it was, although he had some guesses, he couldn't be sure. Then where could he go? Where could he go? Where do you want to go? Heaven's Choice continent's greatest characteristic was the Great Dao Steel. It was probably the place that all Zhou Xian cultivators wanted to explore. He was no exception. Not entering the Great Dao Steel was like entering a treasure mountain and returning empty-handed, too hypocritical. After studying the map for several hours, Zhang Xian finally came to a decision. He put the map away and stood up. There were no buildings in the Echo Valley. It was quite suitable for the people of Zhou Xian to settle down. Because the main road had passed, no one came to disturb them. It was very quiet. With a sway of his body, Lu Xiaoyi appeared beside a stream in the valley. Beside the stream, a Taoist was fishing happily. Lu Xiaoyi stepped forward and bowed. Old senior, this disciple still wants to go out for a walk, but I'm not sure. So, I would like to ask Senior to give me a lift. Immortal Liuzi glanced at him. This little fellow was very smart. He did not have the arrogance of other young disciples. He knew that if he came to him, he would be saved. Yes, I can guarantee that you won't be discovered for the first 10,000 miles. But after that, you can only rely on your own ability. Lu Xiaoyi said with a smile. 10,000 miles is enough. With such a big circle, even the sun god wouldn't be able to keep an eye on it, right? Immortal Liuzi shook his head and laughed. Little fellow, you still lack understanding of upper-level perfected monarchs. If they want to keep an eye on you, they will definitely keep an eye on you. It's just that they don't need to spend the effort. As far as I can see, they won't waste their energy on you. No matter what, keeping an eye on the perfected monarchs is more valuable. I'll give you some tricks, but you have to pay attention to your words and actions. If you continue to be as unrestrained as in the Tao tablet space, no one will be able to help you. With a wave of his hand, he rolled up his sleeves and sent the little fellow out. In fact, he was somewhat puzzled. If he was the master and was in charge of receiving the guests, although the main target would definitely be the perfected monarchs, he would not let his guard down against the swordsmen and upper-level perfected monarchs who performed so well in the Yuanying. Especially this swordsman, the threat he would pose when he grew up would be too great. He was very curious. Was the heavens' chosen person so indifferent? Was he really that confident? Or was he just pretending to be Dafa? But this little question about the little swordsman was quickly thrown to the back of his mind. There were too many things to consider. This was not a problem of one or two cultivators, but a problem between two extremely large realms. As the master of the envoy, he had a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. Most importantly, he had to make an accurate judgment of the heaven's chosen person's next move. This was something that could not be wrong. Lu Xiaoyi appeared thousands of miles away. To be honest, even he himself did not know where he was. What country was it? He did not understand the methods of the immortal Liuzi. The difference in their realms was too great. Moreover, the difference in their orthodoxy was completely incomprehensible. As long as he achieved his goal, it was fine. As for the method used, it was not important. He himself also had many methods to sneak out of the Echo Valley. But after thinking about it, under the remote sensing of many sun spirits, it was basically impossible to do so without attracting attention. Therefore, the safest and most worry-free method was to ask the immortal Liuzi. If he could sit, then he should not stand. If he could lie down, then he should not sit. He understood this principle very well. In this place, nothing was foolproof. Only the sun spirits could ensure the greatest concealment. After all, the Heaven's Choice continent was the stage of the sun spirits. No matter how happily this little bug jumped, a bug was still a bug. Being aimless was also a method. As for how to disguise himself, he had his own ideas. In fact, for him, the safest method was to become a monk again. Who would have thought that an iron-blooded swordsman would actually have the power of merit? But this was also a method that he quickly eliminated. The reason was very simple. At his current stage, this kind of disguise was very unsuitable for him. Before he reached the upper realm, it was not advisable to change his allegiance, even if it was just an act. In fact, for him, if there was really a sun spirit watching him closely, it would be useless no matter what he disguised as. If the sun spirit treated him like a fart and let him go, even if he was a Taoist, he still had many ways to make people unable to see him for a while. It was nothing more than the aura, mystery, mana fluctuations, and finally the appearance. These could all be changed for Yuanying. In a vast sea of people, it was actually very difficult to find each other while Yuanying. Who didn't know how to use the second-hand breath concealment technique? What he was best at was being with the stars. He could very naturally suppress his cultivation to the Jindan realm. This was a very suitable realm. It would not delay the speed of his journey, nor would it cause people to lean on the majestic swordsman in the space of the Tao tablet. Heaven's Choice was really too big. Tens of thousands of cultivators scattered and returned to their homes. The possibility of encountering one of them was very small. Moreover, everyone was in the state of comprehending the impermanence flower of Tao. They needed a quiet period of time to reflect. This was also the reason why he came out in the first place. Chapter 12:26. This was Zhao country, a white area on the map. The Tao tablet was also very ordinary. It was the Tao of spring rain, so the cultivation power in the country was not strong. He walked forward at a steady pace. He looked at the scenery, the people, and the styles. Through this method, he could understand what he was doing. A month later, he walked slower and slower because some things gradually became clearer and some ideas became firmer. He passed by a small town by the mountain and found a small tavern. He ordered a pot of local aged wine and a plate of salted peanuts. He drank alone under the setting sun. The wine was strange. It was not that there was anything wrong with it, but the taste was strange. It should be a combination of some kind of medicinal wine. There was a medicinal fragrance in the spiciness. When he drank it, he did not feel it at first, but the aftertaste lingered. It was as if there was heat seeping into his internal organs. It was especially comfortable in the winter. Of course, this level of medicinal power was insignificant to him, but it was still quite extraordinary to be able to induce heat in cultivators using mortal wine. What exactly is in this wine? I feel that it is different from the others. The tavern owner looked at him warily. It is a 1,000-year-old recipe. Forgive me for not revealing it. If you like it, you can have a few more cups. It will give you extra strength when you travel. Don't worry, the wine will not go to your head. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Sorry, I have no intention of prying into your tavern's secret recipe. I just feel that although this wine is good, it is spicy when it goes down the throat, and the taste is not good. I see that your business is average. Why don't you make some changes to your winemaking skills? Or you can add some mild medicine to neutralize it. I think this wine will sell better. The tavern owner let down his guard. You seem to like wine, but you don't know that my wine recipe has been passed down for thousands of years. Countless generations have tried it. Some have succeeded, and some have failed. In the end, I still return to the old ways of my predecessors. There is no other reason. When drinking wine, you have to look at its audience. In big cities, rich families, high officials, and scholars, of course this wine is not good enough. Not to mention selling it. No one even wants to make it into slop. But here, the mountain roads are rugged and the climate is gloomy and cold. Most of the people who come here to drink wine are peddlers, woodcutters, and hunters. What they care about is not the taste, but whether the after effects last long, whether the medicinal effects last long, whether it can withstand the cold of the deep mountains, whether it can promote the growth of the yang energy, then it is a good wine. Therefore, the key was not whether the wine was good or not, but whether it was suitable for different people. If the customers feel that it's a little spicy, if I really change it to Minha, my old customers won't come anymore. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but laugh. Give me another pot so that we can hurry through the night. The tavern owner's words were actually very simple logic. As a cultivator, and a Yuanian grand cultivator at that, it was impossible for him to not understand. However, in a person's life, there are many things that even if you understood, you might not be able to react to when you actually encountered them. Suitability was the best. It sounded simple, but it was actually very difficult to achieve. This was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi walked slower and slower, and finally stopped at this small tavern to drink wine and watch the sunset. He was beginning to realize this problem. Heading straight for the nameless sword Dao steel. Was that what he really needed? Did he need a place like this to raise his cultivation level? Even if this was a legacy left behind by a sword immortal? Before a sword immortal became a sword immortal, where did his legacy come from? Did he learn it from someone else? If he learned it from someone else, how could he be so immoral? The path of a sword immortal might not be his path. What was suitable for him might be something else. Sword saint or sword god, or sword soldier. Could one become a sword immortal just by learning from a sword immortal? This was the most laughable idea. Looking up at the 36 heavens, which one completely learned from someone else before walking up there. People in different environments should drink different wine. People in different eras, people with different personalities, should have a sword that belonged to them. He had already paved a path that belonged to him on the path of swordsmanship in close to 1,000 years of cultivation. There was no reason for him to change himself when the framework of the system was more or less set. The achievements of a sword immortal were, of course, beyond his reach at the moment, But who knew if he would reach such heights in the future? Would he become a sword immortal? Or would he become a sword soldier that silently cultivated his own path of swordsmanship? This thought had been tormenting him. The most suitable was the best. It was such a simple principle, but when it was finally placed in front of him, the choice was still incomparably difficult. That was a sword immortal. That was the highest achievement of a swordsman since the beginning of this era. What did it mean? Even if the latecomers could not reach such heights, it seemed acceptable to be slightly inferior. Golden immortal? True immortal? Human immortal? To say no to authority. One needed great courage and incomparable confidence. Were you sure that your own path of swordsmanship could reach such heights? Under such pressure, even someone as resolute as Lu Xiaoyi began to hesitate. He was also caught in a dilemma on which choice to make. But this hesitation slowly became clear during the journey. This was the benefit of relaxing his mind. It calmed his boiling hot mind and calmed his surging blood. When he heard the tavern owner's words, it was not that the knowledge of this mortal had truly influenced him, but that his thoughts had already taken 99 steps. He only needed the final hammer to make the final decision. The tavern owner had helped him swing the hammer. Lu Xiaoyi drank a mouthful of wine with satisfaction. Yes, in the future, he could write another thick stroke in his biography. Lu Zhu was enlightened by a mortal in a certain small town on a certain date. From then on, he began his unique path of swordsmanship. Very cultivation, very mainstream. It was in line with all the preaching of Taoism. In fact, how could a mortal decide the thoughts of a cultivator? The reason for this was because the cultivator had already considered this for a long time. In the end, in order to be similar to the novels, they had deliberately arranged it. Cultivators also need to talk about stories. He would not go to the nameless sword path monument. After making this decision, Lu Xiaoyi felt much more relaxed. This was not a permanent decision. It was only temporary. When he became a perfected lord and his path of swordsmanship was completely fixed, he would of course go. However, he would not have the attitude of a primary school student who worshipped him. Instead, he would compare, challenge, and learn from the competition. He could not do it now, because he was still a small seedling in front of a sword immortal's path of swordsmanship. It was not that he did not have confidence in himself, but the huge gap was there. It was not that he could not be influenced just because he did not want to. There were some influences that were imperceptible. Silently, they would change his original path without him noticing. This was exactly what he wanted to avoid. He was the nascent soul, but he was also the sword. This was his true self. He finally thought it through. This opened his mind, and he drank a few more pots. He also filled a few jars with the tavern owner's hidden wine as a memento. Once the tavern owner was happy, he catered to his tastes. Customer, are there any specific steps for the change you mentioned? You are right. Accepting all rivers into the sea and learning from others is the way of our tavern. Lu Xiaoyi's mood instantly changed. He really wanted to smash the wine jar at this blind tavern owner. The great Tao, the great Tao, the great Tao of boasting. It made sense no matter what he said. Chapter 12:27. If he didn't go to the nameless Sword Tao tablet, there was another benefit, which was safety. He could imagine that most of the Heaven's choice forces who had ill intentions towards him would choose to ambush him near the nameless Sword Tao tablet, without exception. Knowing that he had to go, it would save him time and effort. When the time comes, the law can't punish the masses. Perfect. He had disappointed everyone. Lu Xiaoyi took out the Heaven's choice map again. He had to search carefully. If he didn't go to the Sword Tao tablet, then where else could he go? The postnatal Tao tablet? He wouldn't go. He would rather eat a peach of immortality than eat a basket of rotten peaches. It wasn't that he looked down on the postnatal Tao. Since every postnatal Tao could be built here, it was the work of countless seniors. Many of the founders of the postnatal Tao had actually entered the ranks of celestials. In terms of complexity, it wasn't much inferior to the innate Tao. But the problem was, he didn't have time. There were still 30 innate Taos to learn and comprehend in advance. Where would he have the time to deal with these close to 10,000 postnatal deaths? Thanks to him, he was already too spread out and couldn't take care of everything. If he increased the burden, who could withstand it? Could he go to the innate Tao tablet? Not necessarily. Before the collapse of the Taos, the innate Tao tablet was the private land of the half-immortals. The perfected monarchs could enter, but the time they dared to enter was extremely limited. Now that the half-immortals were summoned to the unspeakable place, it was the perfected monarch's turn to be the masters. Yuan Ying could occasionally enter to take a look, and there were still teachers from his own country inside to look after. For someone like him who had a blood debt, if he entered the Tao tablet in a daze, if he met the elders of those families, they would definitely give him a hard time. He had the ability to fight against normal master perfected monarchs, but that referred to a sudden encounter and separation immediately after contact. It didn't refer to this kind of long-term interaction. A lone wolf might be able to bite a weak and sick tiger to death, but if he ran into the tiger's den and did as he pleased, then he would really be asking for trouble. Then, there weren't many choices left. There were only 6 spots left. It wasn't to comprehend, but to pay homage. It was the 6 Taos that had already collapsed. Among them, the most recent one was the impermanence Tao of massacre. A few days ago, the impermanence Tao of massacre dissipated without a single Tao source. Before that, Heaven's Chosen had already used the same method to speed up the collapse of the Tao source of massacre. However, it was unknown who benefited from it in the end. These 6 completely worthless Tao steals piqued his interest. Only in his current situation would he be interested in this. His nascent soul had become more and more inclined towards forming its own path in the process of cultivation. There was no precedent to rely on. That was because he was a nascent soul. I am the only one. If you were to learn from someone else's path to the upper realm, would you still be me? Therefore, he had his own unique premonition about how to reach the upper level. The most direct premonition was that when he fully grasped the 6 innate Taos to a certain extent, his nascent soul would undergo a change that everyone was looking forward to. He had already mastered the 5 elements: fate, merit, void, and slaughter. Now that he had a Nitya Hellguard, he had a total of 6. And yet, the change that he had expected didn't happen. The premonition was still very strong, which meant that there was no problem with the direction. Nothing had happened, so it could only mean that there were still some things that had not been done. He didn't know what it was. He could only slowly explore it himself. It was hard to say how long it would take. 8 to 10 years was it? 100 to 100 years was it? But now, he only had close to 200 years. Whether he was nervous or full of time, it was only a matter of thought. Originally, he thought that the opportunity was with the nameless sword Tao steel. Later, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. That was why he changed his path now. Regarding these 6 Tao realms, he felt that he had already thoroughly studied them. In this short period of time, he really couldn't think of any other direction that he hadn't thought of. Or perhaps the connection between the 6? Fate, 5 elements, merit, void, slaughter, and Nitya Hellguard. Even if he was quick-witted, he still couldn't find a certain connection between these 6. He couldn't even form a sentence with these 6 words. Since he couldn't think of any way at the moment, he could only find a reason from the outside. What other reason could there be from the outside? It was nothing more than the 5 Tao steel ruins and the 5 elements Tao steel. Naturally, the 5 elements Tao steel was placed at the top of the list, because it was the only one that was still alive. Going to the 5 elements Tao steel conflicted with his judgment. Needless to say, the 5 elements Tao steel was the busiest among all the Tao steels of Heaven's Choice, because of the function of its foundation stone. But he wasn't a person who feared difficulties. Among the 6 Tao steels, entering the 5 elements Tao steel was the most difficult. Therefore, he had to be the first to enter. This wasn't the time to start from easy to difficult. Cultivators who had reached this stage had to start from difficult to easy. There was another very important reason. On the map of Heaven's Choice, looking at the locations of the 6 innate Tao steels, he had to arrange the most suitable path for himself to save time. Otherwise, with the vastness of heaven's choice, he might not be able to go through all of them in 10 years. Not to mention the time he needed to study and study. The Tian country, where the 5 elements Tao steel was located, was the closest to him among the 6 countries. Therefore, he actually didn't have any other better choices. After finding a good direction, he continued on his way. With a goal, he put everything else behind. A few months later, he entered the borders of Tian country. Here, he also recovered his cultivation to yuanying. There was nothing to pretend. Even if you pretend to be a Jin Dan, others wouldn't let you enter the steel. Moreover, the cultivation world flourished with the 5 elements. There were many cultivators who cultivated the 5 elements. Originally, Tian country was the country with the most half-immortals in heaven's choice. Now that the half-immortals were gone, it became the country with the most sun spirits. If he pretended to be mysterious here, he wouldn't be able to explain himself if he was exposed. No matter what, there was one thing that was very convenient in heaven's choice. All the Tao steels were abnormally easy to find. There was probably no way to hide them, let alone destroy them. Therefore, it was better to just go to the Dafa. After entering Tian country, the number of great cultivators he met kept increasing. This was also in line with the status of the 5 elements Tao in the cultivation world. Here, he was just a small yuanying, tail tucked between his legs. Along the way, he thought about the conditions to enter the innate Tao steel from Heaven's Choice continent. These things Xian Liuzi had especially reminded them of when they were in Echo Valley. It was because he knew that their biggest wish when they were out traveling was to enter the Tao steel. Therefore, he had explained the various rules to them very clearly. The principle was that the innate Tao steel could only be encountered and not sought. There would always be a chance to find the postnatal Tao steel. Actually, in the end, it was still because the cultivation level of yuanying cultivators was too low. So low that even if the half-immortals left, the innate Tao steel wasn't a place they could casually enter. The resources were limited, the space was limited, countless true monarchs were waiting for the direction of Tao unification. How could a small yuanying like you have a chance? Chapter 1228. There is a fixed procedure for entering the innate Tao tablet. Before the collapse of the Great Tao, all 36 Great Tao countries were guarded by more or less half-immortals. The condition for entering the innate Tao tablet was that several half-immortals had to open the passage for you. Of course, the prerequisite was that you had to get their approval. Under normal circumstances, it was half-immortals who opened the passage, and those who entered the Tao tablet space were half-immortals from other countries. The meat was in the pot. The innate Tao tablet was basically a place for half-immortals to exchange favors. You come to me, I go to you. In a constant search, they would complete their goal of merging the Tao. Success, failure, everything was repeated. Under the circumstances at that time, the Supremes who could enter the innate Tao tablet were basically the direct descendants of the Yang Spirit Supremes of their country. They were the ones who had the most hope to take another step forward. The others, such as the primordial spirit in spirit, basically had no chance, not to mention yuanying. They could only sniff outside the tablet, listen to the sounds, and feel the aura unintentionally leaked out when the great cultivators entered and exited. It was similar to smelling farts. Under the circumstances at that time, Lu Xiaoyi could not even think about entering the innate Tao tablet. But after the collapse of the Great Tao, everything changed. When morality collapsed, there was basically no effect. When fate collapsed, the effect was not obvious. But when merit collapsed, many things were revealed. With the impermanence of the Great Void killing one after another, the rules of entering and exiting the innate Tao tablet also changed. Now, the people who set the rules were the various groups of Yang spirits. It was another rule, one that followed the changes of the Great Tao. When there were half-immortals, the amount of energy they used in the Great Tao tablet was terrifying. Now that they were true monarchs, the amount of energy they used was much smaller. They could also accommodate more people. This sounded like a blessing for yuanying, but in reality, it wasn't the case. Now, The great Tao steel had become a means for the young gods of the 36 countries to trade with each other. Just like their half-immortal predecessors, if the young gods of other countries wanted to enter, they had to be bound by all kinds of conditions. Internally, the great Tao tablet had finally opened an entrance for the potential seeds of the primordial soul Een masters in his country's orthodoxy. It allowed qualified cultivators to enter, but this entrance had not been open to the nascent soul stage. The official path had not yet opened to Yuanying. However, there were still private channels. For example, one could buy it with a spirit tablet. In the cultivation world, there was nothing that couldn't be traded, including the great Tao, as long as you could afford it. Lu Xiaoyi had betrayed him before. Now that the heavens were clear, he was ready to swallow the bitter fruit. It was nothing much. Every sip and every peck was the heavenly Tao. As for the price of entering the innate Tao tablet, there was no fixed price. There was also no Bureau of Commodity Prices. Basically, it was a market that followed the market. The innate Taos were all different from each other. It was no different from the mortal world's merchants. Look at the situation, look at the time, and look at how scarce the great Tao is. It depended on the number of people who cultivated this path. Let's see if you have a backstage discount. For example, the people from Zhouxian had come to the Heaven's Choice continent. Although the number of people was limited, the Heaven's Choice continent still silently raised the price by 30% to show their respect to the guests and the hospitality of the hosts. As for time, the trend of the collapse of the great Tao was already clear. If one collapsed, there would be one less great Tao. Everyone was seizing the time to make a trip to their own great Tao before it collapsed. And it could be expected that the more time passed, the more precious such opportunities would be. Therefore, from now until the beginning of the new era, the price would only rise and would never fall. In terms of the overall market situation, from the beginning of the merit collapse to the present, the price had doubled. This was not surprising. The young gods of Shanghua did not deny that the price would increase several times in the future. Don't think it's expensive. If you miss this wave, the price will not be this high next time. In terms of scarcity, the great Tao of the 5 elements would always be one of the most popular ones. The only one that could be compared to it was Yin and Yang. Other than that, there was no other rival. Therefore, the price was 50% higher than the average price of similar products. Among them, impermanence was undoubtedly the cheapest of the innate Taos. Now that it had collapsed, it was used by the Heaven's Choice continent to entertain the people from Zhouxian. The number of cultivators did not need to be mentioned. Daoist cultivators did not know the 5 elements and could not even release a few spells. The competition was obvious. The last one was the backstage. Lu Xiaoyi only had the backstage. There was no discount at the front stage. The combination of several factors was all unfavorable. There was no good news. However, the specific amount was still not clear. In the cultivation world, the greater the cultivation, the more unreasonable the price would be. Moreover, there would be a random increase in price. Lu Xiaoyi knew that it was very likely that he would be cheated, but he still came because he was rich now. He had 9,000 purple purity in hand, which was 90,000 jade purity. It was not comparable to when he was at his richest, but the difference was not too big. When he sold the great Tao fragment in the ultimate, it was only 30,000 jade purity and 3,000 purple purity. Therefore, he felt that it should not be too expensive here, right? In such a big continent, 36 countries, so many young gods and true monarchs could not have all entered the spirit eye, right? He was too lazy to find those small tricks, brokers, intermediaries, middlemen, and those so-called people who would take less money to settle things for you. The experience of his previous life told him that doing these kinds of things in an unfamiliar place would often cost more. If he was not careful, he might be cheated and lose everything. He was still a black man, so it was not good to expose himself. If he was cheated, who could he find a reason with? Therefore, he did not pay attention to the many signs that were hung high in the market. He also did not pay attention to the individual swindlers with shining eyes. He walked directly to the main hall, where the Tian kingdom was in charge of dealing with the needs of the Tao realm. At least, the price here was reliable. The business of entering and exiting the space of a Tao tablet was a kind of semi-official and semi-public business in the Heaven's Choice continent. The collapse of the great Tao affected all aspects of the cultivation world. You could not say that this was wrong. There were too many monks and too little gruel. Everyone had their needs. There had to be a basis for choice. It was more reasonable than killing each other, right? You want to enter the 5 elements great Tao tablet? The true monarch in charge of reception did not even raise his head. He dealt with a lot of such affairs every day. Most of them were small yuaniing from remote countries who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. They came to try their luck after hearing bits and pieces of news, thinking that they could rely on their pitiful wealth to fight for a future. How could it be possible? Yes, I dare not trouble the master. I just want to know the approximate price. If I can get it, I will. If the difference is too far, then I will give up. I will not have such improper thoughts. This was still reasonable. The true monarch's tone was cold, and he spoke very quickly, without a strong recommendation. The price of entering the 5 elements great Tao tablet is 10,000 purple purity. No bargaining, and this is after 8 years. If you come again next month, the price will not be this. Also, when you can enter, it will be 10 years later. Lu Xiaoyi did not hesitate and turned to leave. In that case, sorry to bother you. Chapter 1229. Why don't you just rob? This was Lu Xiaoyi's only thought. The price was outrageous, and the time was full of uncertainty. He could not accept such conditions. Therefore, he found the 3 largest shops nearby and paid a certain fee to inquire about the black market conditions for entering the 5 elements Tao tablet space. The results were different. The fee was 5,000 purple, half in advance. The time was not fixed, waiting for follow-up notice. He was not disappointed. This was the characteristic of intermediaries. Of course, he would not choose such an unreliable method. Although the price was acceptable, according to his experience in his previous life, when you paid half in advance, all kinds of strange fees would follow one after another. All kinds of names, all kinds of excuses. If you don't pay, your previous investment will go down the drain. If you pay, you will eventually find that you spent more than the normal way. The so-called cheap price was just a means to lure you into a trap. Whoever jumped into it was stupid. Moreover, there was no accurate time schedule. If one party breached the contract, there seemed to be no place for arbitration. This cultivation world was getting more and more chaotic. The essence of the problem was that he did not have a reliable backer. Not to mention the sun god of Tian country. Even the sun god of other countries would be good. Connections were very important in the cultivation world. It could make people who were up to no good carefully consider the price of breaking an appointment. Unfortunately, not to mention the sun god, he did not even know a supreme here. After careful consideration, he decided to give up. He was in an unfamiliar environment, unfamiliar with the people and places, and the people he was facing were all high-end. This made it impossible for him to use any tricks or have any crooked thoughts, because there was no place here that would tolerate him. When the gap between the realms and strength reached a certain extent, he could only play his part. This was an attitude of respect to the master. He still thought of everything too simply. The innate Tao tablet. When he heard about it in the main world, he did not think much of it. He thought that relying on the so-called Tao tablet to improve his Tao realm strength was a shortcut, but in fact this thing was no different from a Tao fragment. A shortcut was still a shortcut. Countless cultivators broke their heads and flocked to it. As time passed, this situation would become more and more intense. He could not think of any alternative, so he could only comfort himself. Maybe his opportunity was not here. His current problem was how to find a thread that connected the 6 Tao realm cultivators that he was very familiar with. Or a primer? It could activate something hidden. Previously, he had chosen the 5 elements Tao steel because it was the only one of the 6 great Taos that had survived. The only one was the key to the possible variables. Now, He had to consider the problem from another angle. He had to find the answer from the 5 great Taos of the main body that had disappeared. Was this more in line with the general trend of the cultivation of the universe? That was how cultivation was. Looking at it from different angles, what seemed black yesterday might be white today. He was a little disappointed, but it didn't affect his mood. After leaving the 5 elements Tao steel and leaving the bustling crowd that was still searching for his own path, he suddenly felt that there was no need for him to be like the masses. I'm different. It's me. It was me. In that case, the next step should also be different. But why was it different? He had no clue. If the 5 elements Tao steel was like this, then the other innate Tao steels were not much better. Lu Xiaoyi took out the map and looked at it. The closest one was the Destiny Tao steel, the state of Yuan. That was his next target. He had to go through them one by one before he could feel at ease. Thus, he returned to his Jin Dan state and began to fly at a low altitude. The distance wasn't short, but it would still take several months. Along the way, he would pass through a dozen or so countries. There were all kinds of post-celestial Tao steels, but they couldn't move him. In the Heaven's Choice continent, there were no such restrictions as road permits. Especially for cultivators, this was a continent where cultivation flourished. All rules didn't exist in front of cultivators. They only followed the rules of the cultivation world. But how cultivators flew was very particular in the Heaven's Choice continent. These were the rules of cultivators. Everyone would subconsciously abide by them, and very few people would openly disdain them. The atmosphere of the Heaven's Choice continent was 1,000,000 feet deep, but this didn't belong to the middle or low-class cultivators. In the Heaven's Choice continent, flying at a certain height represented your status. High-level cultivators could fly down, but low-level cultivators couldn't casually fly up. This was also a form of social hierarchy. For example, above 10,000 feet in the past, that was the sky of half-immortals. Even sun god, true monarchs didn't dare to casually go up. Now that there were no more half-immortals, but the rules were still there. Because no one knew when these murderous weapons of the human world would come back. So the good habits formed over millions of years couldn't be easily thrown away. Below 10,000 feet, that was the range of true monarchs' activities. Of course, true monarchs would occasionally go up for a spin. That was a kind of mood. Below 30,000 feet, that was the range of Yuanying's activities. It was already considered a relatively busy airspace. In Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, there were at least hundreds of thousands of Yuanying in such a huge Heaven's Choice continent. As long as a small portion of them flew in the air, it was very common to cross paths. The Jin Dan's flying limit was even lower, below 10,000 feet. In fact, in order to avoid occasionally fighting with Yuanying cultivators, the Jin Dan often set this limit even lower. 6,000 to 7,000 feet was their most common flight area. Combined with the number of Yuanying cultivators in the millions, it was already very crowded. Of course, it was still much better than the Foundation establishment cultivators who were restricted to within 1,000 feet. This was the flight level of the entire Heaven's Choice continent. As long as you were a cultivator, you had to abide by it. But on the continent, there were mountains. The vast land and mountains were tall. The Wolf Ridge, which was like a natural moat in the 5 rings, was somewhat lacking here. Below 10,000 feet, it was a hill in Heaven's Choice. If one wanted to fly out of Tian country and head towards the Yuanying country, there were many such mountain ranges. Once one reached there, the earth would be cut off. If low-level cultivators wanted to pass through, they could only fly close to the ground. They didn't dare to go too high. Thus, many canyons were formed. Those who went in and out were all Foundation establishment Jin Dan cultivators. This was also a characteristic of Heaven's Choice. Reality proved that even if you could fly, the sky might not belong to you. If Lu Xiaoyi wanted to leave Tian country, he had to pass through such a long canyon. This was nothing. He had never cared about the so-called status of a cultivator. Practicality was more important, and he didn't care about false reputation. As for the name of the canyon, he couldn't be bothered to find out. There was an old man at the entrance of the canyon who casually set up a stall on the ground. It seemed like he was selling stones. There were also a few cultivators who were passing by. They looked like they were all Foundation establishment cultivators. It was their first time passing through the canyon, and they saw that these stones had a special interest, so they stopped for a while. Lu Xiaoyi naturally wouldn't stop for such a small matter. But when he passed by, the old man's words made him stop in his tracks. "Buy my 5 colored stones, and you can enter the 5-element steel. Walking the great Tao for one's whole life. You meet the king on the left?" Chapter 1230. There was a reason why Lu Xiaoyi stopped. Meeting on the left of the path literally meant meeting on the side of the road. But the profoundness of the words added another layer of meaning to the left of the path. The left and right positions of increasing rhythm. Left, right opposite. The path of Tao prioritizes the right. The right is supreme. Rights, royalty. Men from the right, women from the left. Records of Emperor 1. Left virtuous, right Qi. Wei Zhao. Right is still high, left is still low. According to the ancient ways, the right is supreme in the imperial court, hence the demotion to the left. Assisting the vassals is the left official. By saying all this, he was giving a definition to Zhua. By extension, it gave Zhua a lot of meanings that it didn't have on the surface. For example, it was slightly inferior, unimportant, left out, considered inferior, and so on. In the cultivation world, there was the saying of the unorthodox path, which was also the meaning. But the path of Tao was righteous, not abandoning the unorthodox path. The path of Tao was 99, leaving a line for the heavens. In Taoism, the attitude towards cultivation was never to be one-sided. To walk the path of Tao, one would also leave a small path. This was the true essence of Taoism. As for some specific matters, there was also the saying of leaving a line for the left. For example, the question of the qualifications to enter the innate Tao tablet. There were many conditions, but they were all proper questions. For example, one's own cultivation level, connections, resources, background, opportunities. But other than these, Taoism would also leave a secret door for those cultivators who could never meet the requirements. There were no fixed conditions and no fixed time. Maybe there would be one every few years, or maybe once every 100 years. A cultivator who did not meet the requirements would be allowed to enter the Tao tablet. This was kind of propaganda. The original intention was to spread the meaning of Tao, never giving up on anyone. It was a very advanced way of thinking. It was to tell you that there would always be a path to improvement waiting for you. You could not let the lower class of cultivators lose hope. As for who would receive such a good thing, would it be real or fake? Or would it become a dignified excuse for high-level cultivators to do favors with each other? These were not important. What was important was that in terms of thinking, in terms of propaganda, there must be such a gap. It was called the fate of the left of the path. The meaning was that one should not only look at the path of Tao, but also at the side of the path. There were also opportunities. This old man's words had a hidden meaning. In the world of cultivation, there was nothing that could be said clearly. They wouldn't be like him and say, "Don't miss this opportunity when you're passing by." That was too vulgar. That's not true at all. In the future, even if he wrote a biography, no one would read it. It didn't have the aura of an immortal, only the stench of money, even if that was the truth. Thus, he stopped in his tracks and walked over to the old man's stall to look at both the goods and the person. In terms of people, he was just an ordinary old foundation building cultivator. There was no mistake about that. In terms of goods, he was just a bunch of ordinary stones. He was not familiar with the terrain here. When he was flying in the sky, he seemed to have seen a large river. It was in the dry season, and the riverbed was half exposed. There was a lot of sand and stones in it, and it seemed that these stones were taken from it. But to say that they were completely worthless didn't seem right either. Nature's spiritual opportunity was top-notch, and the rocks in the riverbed also contained spiritual opportunity. Under the changes of time, different colors had appeared, and spiritual opportunity was faintly flowing. They shouldn't be called useless. But in essence, These stones were defective products that had been contaminated by spiritual opportunity for a long time and still hadn't turned into spirit stones. They might have turned into jadeite or jade, but they just hadn't turned into spirit stones. In the cultivation world's minds, stones that hadn't turned into spirit stones were just trash. Apart from looking a little better, and mortals could put them in their homes as decorations, they didn't have many other uses. The few foundation building cultivators took a look and left in disappointment. They were still too young and lacked experience. They also didn't have extravagant hopes for Tao steals, so they couldn't understand the hidden meaning in the old man's words. The old man quietly watched the young man pick up the most beautiful stone. The 5 colors were evenly distributed, and the whole body was bright without a trace of impurities. It was already a top-grade jade. In a mortal world, it could be considered a family heirloom. He admired it and fiddled with it, then put it down. Then he picked up a pure-colored stone, which also contained a most abundant spiritual opportunity. He carefully felt it, then put it down. Finally, he picked up a pure, ordinary stone. It was ugly, ordinary, and swarthy. You like this one? You can see the true essence in the ordinary, and you can see the greatness in nature. Just like our cultivation, we will eventually reach this step. The old man spoke at the right time, but the young man still put it down gently. I don't like it. I thought there was something hidden inside. Since there isn't anything, why should I like it? Pretending to be profound? Ordinary is ordinary. If I really pursue ordinary, what is the point of cultivating? What is the point of pursuing truth? The old man nodded. There will always be something you like. Pick one. I have been selling here for a few days, but I haven't sold a single one yet. Lu Xiaoyi didn't expose him. An expert and a swindler were only one step apart. This was a game. He could see through it, but it wasn't easy to expose it. Although his actions in Tian country weren't ostentatious, they weren't low-key either. It was normal for people to notice him. With these people's experience, it was easy for them to arrange some stories. As for this person's cultivation, when he really paid attention to him, he had his suspicions. Naturally, he also found something different. It was a very advanced breath-holding technique. It was so advanced that even if he knew there was a problem, he couldn't see through it. The world was big, and there were all kinds of strange things. A profession like a swindler also required skills. It wasn't strange to be more unique in a certain aspect. As long as it wasn't an open robbery, he had to leave some face for those who played with skills. This was his philosophy. Everyone was in the cultivation world for a living. He wasn't willing to go too far, even if he was a swordsman. He had his own views on good and evil. Therefore, in the eyes of cultivators like Little Meow, who had never seen the world of mortals, he was a little strange. He shouldn't blindly strike when he should strike, and dawdle when he should strike. Actually, if one really understood him, they would know that he was a person with a lot of standards. It was just that his standards were different from others. Old man, you're too picky when selling these things. Not opening for a few days? I don't mind opening for you once, but you have to know the price, right? You have to know that the reason why you can't open for business may be because of the goods. But there's also another possibility that it's because of the price. The old man didn't think so. Those who think it's expensive are because they don't know what they're buying. Those who really know the business won't think it's expensive. This old man's things, no matter which one, will be priced at 1,000 purple. Buy and use as you wish. Little friend, do you think my price is expensive or not? Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but laugh. This was a little unprofessional. The price to enter the 5 Elements Monument was 20,000 in the official store, 5,000 in the unscrupulous store, but your street stall changed it to 1,000? Buy and use as you wish. If the price was too low, it meant that it wasn't trustworthy. Such a simple logic. As a professional swindler, how could he not understand it? No matter how brainless a customer was, not only would he not be fooled because of the cheap price, he would be even more vigilant. This was human nature. He smiled and pointed at him. Old man, with this price, you should set up a stall in front of the Tao Monument. Since it's here, you can only pay with spirit stones, and it has to be low-grade spirit stones. Chapter 12:31. The old man was startled. Only then did he realize that the other party was treating him as a swindler. It seemed like he had not played this kind of trick for a long time. He was a little rusty. That was good too. He wanted to see this person's character. This was also his purpose. In this cultivation world, there was no help for no reason. There was always a purpose and cause. He could come here because of his position. He knew a lot of secrets that the top cultivators did not know. The purpose might not be in front of him. He might not even be able to reap the rewards. But as a cultivator, he was half a step into the realm of half immortal. He was already used to preparing for a rainy day. He was used to making arrangements in advance, especially in this turbulent era, this unpredictable universe. Standing in his position, there were some things that he had to do, because he was not alone. Little friend, you are so cautious. You make my heart cold. If you think I am a swindler, why don't you cut me down with your sword? That way you can save your breath. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Why would I cut you down? At most, it would be an attempt. But old man, your method is not very good. You start with 1,000 purple. No wonder you can't open a deal. Based on your bidding, even if you sit in front of the tablet for 100 years, you won't be able to negotiate a deal. The old man immediately understood where his loophole was. He could not be blamed. He had not participated in this kind of small matter for 1,000 years. It was all handled by the other disciples. To him, there were too many things involved. Every aspect, inside and outside. How could he care about the black market price of his own tablet? Oh, little friend, why don't you tell me about the current market price? I have not been swindling for many years. I'm a little rusty. This old man was a little strange. Could he be a swindler with a story? Lu Xiaoyi was not short time. He did not mind staying here for a while. Although his first judgment was that this old man might be the accomplice of those middlemen, he realized that something was wrong. Unless this old man was a genius swindler who could change his opinion through a story. The official price in Tian country is 20,000. The black market starts at 5,000. I don't know how much it will be in the future. Then, old man, your price of 1,000 purple, how many people do you think will believe it? The old man was shocked. He laughed and said, 1,000 years have passed. The price of goods has skyrocketed. The changes in the general trend are so terrifying. However, this method of assisting the Tao has also improved greatly. He stopped joking around and pointed at the man. Single-eared, when I saw you fight in the Echo Valley, you have the ability of an old friend. Since you have come to my Tian country and want to enter the 5 elements Tao steel, is there any reason to refuse? My surname is Pang. You can call me Taoist Pang. I am the lord of the 5 elements. How can I let you come here in high spirits and return in disappointment? There is no need to beat around the bush. It was a small matter that was not worth wasting too much time on. With a wave of his hand, a mysterious energy flowed into one of the stones. Immediately, there was something different about it. However, even though Lu Xiaoyi was so close, he still could not tell what the difference was. If that's the case, do you think 1,000 purple purity is worth it? Lu Xiaoyi knew that he had made a mistake. He didn't know who Taoist Pang was because at the scene of the Echo Valley, there were dozens of young spirits. Which one of them could he see their true faces? He didn't even need to do it deliberately. His little bit of divine sense couldn't penetrate it, and he had never had such thoughts. He didn't think that the old man had any reason to lie to him. It wasn't worth it. In front of the yang spirit, he was still an ant, but he was very curious. Why did Taoist Pang give him such an opportunity? Was it because of his amazing performance at the Echo Valley? Or was it because of the ability of an old friend? Old friend? Where was this old friend? Zhou Xian? Or he obediently took out 1,000 strands of purple purity and offered it, but he didn't ask anything. If he knew that the other party would naturally say it, and if he didn't want to say it, it would be awkward if he asked. Senior's price is indeed preferential. This junior shouldn't take advantage of this, but on the path of cultivation, there is no harm in being prepared. This disciple is also a lazy spirit gatherer, so I'll accept your kindness. Taoist Pang was very satisfied. This young man was very straightforward. He was not pretentious and knew how to be humble. Very good. Then let's go. Lu Xiaoyi bowed again and slowly retreated. However, he did not return to Tian country. Instead, he continued to move forward. Obviously, he had no intention of immediately entering the five elements Dao steel. Watching him leave, Daoist Pang was silent. Old friend? It wasn't a lie. There really was such a person. It was just that he was not a friend, but an enemy. The enemy was also a swordsman, and there was more than one. Since 10,000 years ago, Heaven's choice had frequently come, causing the entire continent to be in chaos. Of course, cultivators who weren't high enough didn't know. Not to mention Jean Dan's Yuanying. Even Supremes were rarely heard of. Those swordsmen only dealt with half-immortals. Half-immortals wanted face. Who would be willing to speak of a half-immortal's body being hung up and tortured? Therefore, they all swallowed their teeth and never spread it outside. It was a disgrace to the continent. It wasn't until several thousand years ago that Heaven's choice disappeared without a trace. He had only heard bits and pieces of it from his own half-immortal master. He had also once raised a pot and poured wine for him when his master and that guy were having a drinking contest. Saying that he was an old friend was probably exaggerating. At that time, he didn't have the qualifications to be friends with him. Of course, he still didn't have the qualifications now. He originally thought that everything was in the past, but with the collapse of the Great Tao, many things had to be brought up again. Before his master and the other half-immortals left Heaven's choice, they had specially warned him. At this time, he had already become the young god of Heaven's choice. After his master and the others left, he became the person in charge of Heaven's choice. Therefore, there were some things that needed to be clearly explained to him. There were many things that he had to say, and one of them was the origin of these swordsmen. There seemed to be a few of them, but they never came in groups. They always came alone. However, no matter which one of them came, they would cause a big or small disturbance in Heaven's choice. Although these people hadn't come for several thousand years, and the ones who came now were Supremes who were blocked outside of Heaven's choice as a target of vigilance, he never forgot his master's instructions. Fortunately, after several hundred years, it could be considered safe and sound. Most of these lunatics probably died from the exhaustion of time, right? Of course, it was also possible that they were trapped in an unspeakable place, unable to come out and do evil again. When he saw this little guy, he had a certain intuition. Zhou Xian was very close to Heaven's choice in the upper realm. So how could he not know the actual situation in Zhou Xian? This kind of person couldn't have been raised by Zhou Xian. He also had spies in Zhou Xian. Although he couldn't be completely sure, he was very clear about one thing, and that was that this little guy's origin was very unusual. He had his own opinions on how to deal with this matter, and it was different from the older generation of Heaven's Choice half-immortals. However, he was very clear about one thing, and that was that the stupidest way was to kill him. Other than being affected by great karma, he wouldn't be able to get anything. He couldn't kill him, and turning a blind eye would be too passive. Therefore, the best way was, of course, to invest. This is what a big shot should do. It had nothing to do with being open-minded, only talking about gains and losses. Chapter 1232. This was the reason why Taoist Pang came here. This kind of thing couldn't be done by others. There were many things that he needed to directly judge whether this person was worth investing in or not. Strength was only one aspect. There were many more important things. At the very least, he couldn't invest in an ingrate, right? Therefore, he needed to see this person clearly. This matter could only be done by himself. Otherwise, he wouldn't be at ease. Overall, he was satisfied with his contact. As a sun god, he had his own unique way of looking at people. What kind of people could he invest in? What kind of people needed to be kept at a respectful distance? He had his own standards, knowing that he might be a swindler, but not rashly using force. This showed that although he appeared to be iron-blooded on the outside, he had the quality of accepting others. This showed that he could tolerate differences. He wasn't an inferior person who only had a high level of swordsmanship. Knowing that he might have an old acquaintance with the sword vein, he was still willing to pay 1,000 strands of zeeching instead of taking advantage of the situation. This showed that he had a business philosophy. This was very important. Many cultivators cultivated their brains until they became stupid. They were too idealistic. They thought that since there was an old acquaintance, they should exchange what they didn't have and not take any benefits. They took everything for granted. This was very dangerous. It was impossible to coexist with such a person for a long time because he didn't know how to give. Finally, after knowing some things, he knew to keep quiet. This showed that he was very smart and a qualified partner. This made his investment a reality. He wouldn't go back on his word. But all of this wasn't enough for him to see the swordsman as a friend. Swordsmen were all pests. Taoist Pang knew this very well. Therefore, his strategy was actually to attack from two sides. The best way was to destroy the swordsman. A dead swordsman was a good swordsman. This would never change. The only difference was that he couldn't let him die in Heaven's Choice. This would bring endless trouble to Heaven's Choice. It would be best if he died in Zhou Xian. Someone from Zhou Xian would do it himself. Not only would he be able to deal with an uncontrollable tiger that would rise in the future, he would also be able to divert the trouble and create some trouble for Zhou Xian. This was a plan that sounded impossible, but if one took into account the person's background, then everything could be arranged. Heaven's Choice was in charge of investing, and Zhou Xian was in charge of killing. No matter what the result was, it was an acceptable result for him. This should be the vision of a major cultivator. Now that this matter had come to an end, the clues had already been buried. They would only need to see how things developed in the future before making adjustments. Taoist Pang sighed. After the elders and half-immortals left, there were too many things in the world of the continent that needed to be paid attention to. With a flicker of his body, he disappeared from the spot, leaving behind a pile of colorful stones that were dazzling under the sunlight. Lu Xiaoyi continued on his way. He didn't change his itinerary just because he had obtained the right to enter the 5 elemental Dao steel. That was his personality. He was extremely wary of other people's help. He was the type of person who would not leave even if you try to chase him away. Intuitively, he felt that whether the 5 elements Dao steel entered or not had already been reduced to chicken ribs. It was meaningless. This was not only from a cultivation level, but also from a psychological level. It was as if he suddenly had an epiphany. It was no longer important. He firmly believed in his own intuition. Old friend? It couldn't be an old friend of Zhou Xian, because in Zhou Xian, he didn't have any sect elders that he could rely on. It wasn't that he looked down on carefree wandering cultivators, but Zhou Xian's cultivators lacked the quality to leave a deep impression on others. In Echo Valley, he dominated with his sword. Those with a bit of insight and experience would know that his ability was only a personal talent and not a product of the inheritance system. There were so many sun spirits in Heaven's Choice, so it was impossible for them not to see this point. If he thought a bit deeper, what kind of sword inheritance could produce such a killing-style disciple? In fact, there weren't many suspects. Xianyuan's sword school definitely had its own legend in Heaven's Choice. This could be seen from the nameless Sword Dao Steel's establishment. Those who could come to Heaven's Choice must be those unruly Xianyuan swordsmen. Apart from the 13th ancestor, there must be others. The old friend that Taoist Pang spoke of was none other than these people. But he couldn't ask. It wasn't strange that the Sun Spirit Supreme could see through his sword inheritance. Even if his current swordsmanship system was obviously different from Xuanyuan's, the root was the same. This topic wasn't easy to talk about. He couldn't, but fortunately, Taoist Pang couldn't either. Lu Xiaoyi found that his identity was beginning to stink on the streets. This was inevitable. As his cultivation base grew higher and higher, the standards of the cultivators he came into contact with also grew higher and higher. His hidden cards were gradually revealed, especially among the higher-ups. He couldn't stop this trend. The only thing he could do was to improve himself as soon as possible. Even if others knew something, they couldn't do anything to him. 1,000 wisps of purple light didn't buy the qualification to enter the Tao realm of the 5 elements. It was a kind of attitude, an attitude of accepting the kindness of others. As for what was hidden behind the kindness, he couldn't guess. This was the evil consequence of leaving the sect for too long and venturing out alone. Lu Xiaoyi realized a problem. If he acted as a Zhou Xian cultivator, he could still control the suspicions of others and keep a low profile. But if he acted as a fifth-ring Xianyuan swordsman, he couldn't avoid trouble. This was the cultivation legacy left behind by his Xianyuan swordsman seniors. Sometimes it would help him, sometimes it would bring him inexplicable danger. This was something that he had to bear since he started learning swordsmanship. When his realm was low, he couldn't feel it. Now that his ability had increased, it was a test of his ability to balance outside. Don't underestimate any cultivator, no matter if it was Zhou Xian or Heaven's Choice. 3 months later, he arrived at Yuan country, which was the place where the Destiny's Great Tao tablet was set up. He could feel that the frequency of cultivators appearing here couldn't be compared to Tian country. One side was bustling with traffic, the other side was deserted. The Destiny's Great Tao had already collapsed for thousands of years. The impact on the cultivation world was far-reaching. It was hard to feel in the main world, but it was very obvious in Heaven's Choice continent. For cultivators who already had a certain amount of Destiny's Tao realm strength when the Destiny's Great Tao tablet collapsed, it was very difficult for them to change their path. But for cultivators below Yuanying, change was inevitable. Because the Tao tablet was gone, the only way to understand the Tao realm was gone. Then, what was the point of continuing to stay here? In these thousands of years, the collapse of the Tao tablet had a direct impact on Yuan country, which was the loss of middle and low-level cultivators. Most of the basic forces would choose countries that still had Tao tablets. This was the trend. Of course, there were also those with a firm Tao heart, but these were the minority. Those who could determine the direction of their great Tao at the Foundation Establishment Gene Dance stage were very rare. This was the current situation of Yuan country. They still had more than half of their high-level cultivators, but the lower levels were gone. Chapter 1233. Lu Xiaoyi quite liked this kind of Yuanhua because it was cold and cheerless without much right and wrong. What was interesting was that Yuanhua had existed for 1,000 years, and no other country dared to make a move on this country that had lost its Tao. This was completely different from the nature of the mortal world. Without an emperor, a mortal country could not survive and would immediately become the target of invasion by the surrounding countries. But in this cultivation world, no one would do that, because everyone knew that sooner or later, the Tao tablet would be restored. Fate was not gone, but scattered in the universe, and there would be a day when it would be merged with the Tao again. Who would be willing to be targeted by fate at that time? Lu Xiaoyi followed the map and easily found the place where the Tao tablet once stood. 1,000 years had passed, and there was no longer any trace of its former glory, only a barren land. Weeds grew everywhere, and wild beasts wreaked havoc, a desolate scene. The Taoist attitude towards the collapse of the Tao tablet was very similar to the Taoists. Just let nature take its course. Because of this, there were no tombstones erected to commemorate this place, and no one came to take care of it. Even the farmers didn't open up new fields here, completely ignoring this place. This kind of attitude represented the understanding of fate cultivators towards the Tao. They were waiting. They did not know what was right to do, what was wrong. Therefore, they simply did not do anything. To find the exact location of the Tao tablet, Lu Xiaoyi spent a lot of effort. A point on the map and a point in reality were two different things, and he had no basis to make a judgment, because there was nothing left of the original Tao tablet. Not to mention the ruins, there was not even a trace of life. It was really a vast expanse of whiteness, truly clean. In the end, a Yuanying who happened to pass by pointed out the specific location for him. This kind of situation was not new. When fate had just collapsed, there were people coming every day out of admiration. Later on, even the Tao source was gone, and the number of people who came was much less. After 1,000 years, those who deliberately came for the Tao tablet were almost extinct. Those who came had the mentality of paying homage, lamenting the vicissitudes of life, reminiscing about the past, and bringing nothing but desolation with them. In the eyes of the Yuanian cultivators, Lu Xiaoyi was such a hipster and hipster. He sat cross-legged on the original spot of the Tao tablet, and there was only mud under his butt. The Tao tablet was erected by the power of the Tao state, and not by digging a deep hole to lay the foundation. So there was not even a broken tile. There might have been some in the past, but after 1,000 years, it had been picked clean. Cultivators picked it once. Mortals picked it countless times. They all brought it back, as if they could control their own destiny. There was no one around him, and the grass was up to his waist. When he sat was slightly further away. 2 pheasants run past him. A green snake slithers along the edge of his robe, and a lone wolf stares at him from afar. The owners of these wastelands pay attention to this stranger who intrudes into their territory with vigilance. Fortunately, in the cultivation environment, even ordinary beasts have some intelligence and know that this human is not to be trifled with. What was he doing here? Actually, he himself. If he to go, he. Dao. He didn't know. He originally thought that since he was here, would he be able to feel something? Would he have some kind of inspiration? Now it seemed that he was thinking too much. Even the Sun God Supreme couldn't feel anything here, let alone him, a mere Yuaniing. After doing nothing for a few days, Lu Xiaoyi, who had gained nothing, took out the map and looked for his next target, the Huan country, where the Great Void Dao tablet was. If he still didn't gain anything, then he would go to the Fan country, where the great path of merit and virtue was located, which was relatively far away. Although he knew that there was a high probability that he wouldn't get anything, he would still go down one by one. It was for peace of mind and also for a sense of ritual. It wasn't easy to come to Heaven's choice, so he had to go down one by one. As for the task that Xian Liuzi assigned to them, he didn't even think about it. The movement of a realm always depended on a small group of people at the highest level. Just like how the lower class of the mortal world could never decide the direction of war in the cultivation world, this kind of centralization was even more serious. He already had a rough guess. The only thing he couldn't judge was whether Heaven's choice had more choices. In the main world, although the upper cultivation realms were scattered, there were still a lot of them in terms of absolute numbers. Heaven's choice had many choices to make. This was destined to be a lonely journey. For the sake of the upper realm, for the sake of prolonging his dog life for another 1,000 years, after the glory of Echo Valley, he hid his claws and fangs, forgetting his sharpness. He transformed into an ordinary cultivator, wandering the vast lands of the Heaven's Choice continent. In fact, he wasn't the only one wandering. Heaven's Choice had a huge base of cultivators. The chaos caused by the collapse of the Great Path in the cultivation world made the entire continent restless. It was a rootless uneasiness in the heart, a confusion about the future. In order to dispel the uneasiness in their heart, many people chose to travel. They were considered to be cowards, but the brave ones all swam to the main world. In these 2 years, he went to 3 more places. Great Void's Huan country, Merit's Fan country, Slaughter's Hung country. He was now standing at the location of Slaughter's Great Path in Hung country. This place wasn't as desolate as the Destiny Dao Steel. Because only 100 years had passed, and because the Dao source had disappeared not long ago, one could still vaguely see the shape of the Dao Steel. It was the same as the impermanence Dao Steel in Echo Valley. There were still people lingering here, wanting to find something. Unfortunately, they were destined to be disappointed. It was gone. Lu Xiaoyi was also one of the people lingering here. He could see that the people lingering here were all Yuaniing from small countries. They only cared about the Great Path of Slaughter. The Great Path of Slaughter was cruel. When they grew up, they didn't expect that the holy land in their hearts had already turned into ruins. They were all people who had fallen from the edge of the world. There was no need for them to have known each other before. 200 years ago, I came here. Unfortunately, I didn't have the qualifications to enter the Dao Steel. You don't know, but at that time, the cultivators gathered in Hung Country were as numerous as carps crossing the river. Everyone had a premonition that the great path of slaughter was about to collapse, so they all wanted to catch the last bus. At that time, all the young spirit true monarchs of Hung Country came out together to maintain order. How many of those who cultivated the great path of slaughter had a good temper? A middle-aged cultivator's face was full of regret. It was only here that strange cultivators had a common language and were no longer alienated and guarded against each other. This was because they all had the same root and the same dream. Another nascent soul stage cultivator echoed, "Yes, I remember that the price of entering the Tao Steel was already 20,000 purple purity, and it was still priceless. There were too many people. I really don't know where those guys got the purple purity, but I was poor, and fortunately I was poor. I heard that later on. Many people paid the purple purity but didn't have time to enter. They caused a lot of trouble, and several small-scale conflicts broke out. Because of this, now that I think about it, the past was like a dream. It's sad and lamentable." Chapter 1234. A group of people gathered there, sighing endlessly. Lu Xiaoyi listened from the side. From the words of these cultivators, he could also hear that the road of Tao was full of setbacks and changes in an instant. The changes of the Tao were not something that could be easily controlled by humans. The slaughter has ended, spreading to the universe. We who follow the Tao do not know where to go. A cultivator sighed. An impassioned cultivator glared and shouted, "The slaughter does not exist. It only exists in everyone's hearts. Why blame the heavens and blame others? Sigh in your heart. It's not the slaughter. I heard that the people of the main world are not sad because their Tao is gone. Instead, they're looking to the future, searching for themselves. If they can do this, then we, the heavens-chosen cultivators, are inferior?" A cultivator echoed, "That's right. Leaving the continent and going to main world, there might be a new world. In these years, I heard that many heavens-chosen cultivators have already left the negative space. However, information is not flowing freely, and they're not rich. If everyone has a way, why don't we all exchange what we have and travel together? We can also look after each other." These words were a bit too much. They met by chance. How could they trust each other? Just based on the fact that they both cultivated the Tao of slaughter, it was a bit too far-fetched. It might be realistic to go out together, but if they really went to the main world, the result would be a mess. This was the common mentality of ordinary heavens-chosen cultivators. They were hesitant and had no idea what to do. At this time, if someone were to call for help, it would be easy to gather a group of people. If it were the great powers of Shangguan, there would be even more people following them. Some cultivators were very clear-headed. "We are just a few people in the main world. What can we do? Even if we gather all the fellow Taoists who cultivate the Tao of slaughter, how many would there be? If we leave the main world, we can only find those inferior small star realms to live in. Those large realms of the main world are protected by the great membrane of heaven and earth. It is not easy to break through. Why don't we wait? I heard that some great powers have similar thoughts. If that day really comes, we will follow their tales and share the glory. Walking out of the Heaven's Choice continent is ultimately a matter for all of us. It is not something that can be done with individual strength." Lu Xiaoyi had traveled around the Heaven's Choice continent for many years and knew that similar arguments were prevalent here. The Heaven's Choice continent was too big. Since its establishment, it had never been unified. This was inevitable. With only 36 innate Tao steels standing there, who would be willing to submit? In addition, they had tens of thousands of post-celestial great Taos. Putting aside their strength, they were all very ambitious. There was no such thing as Jing Kong up until now. There hadn't been a single country that had made it clear that they would leave the Heaven's Choice continent. Everything seemed to have come from nowhere, but since there was wind, there must be an internal reason. One day, when the time was ripe, when a portion of the power of a large country united, it would inevitably lead a large number of small and medium-sized countries to form a loose alliance. In theory, this way of walking out of the negative space was the safest way. It was vast and unstoppable. For a domain war like this, it was not enough to rely on the power of the superior nations. They needed cannon fodder and pawns. Then, as a loose cultivator from a small country, are you willing to follow the mainstream to the origin world? Or to stay in heaven's choice peacefully? Survival of the fittest. Everyone takes what they need. Of course, there were some who disagreed. For example, an old cultivator said, "Go to the origin world? Were there great Tao tablets in the main world?" It was said that the cultivators of the origin world didn't care if the great Tao collapsed or not, but they were already used to cultivating in an environment without great Tao tablets. So it doesn't really matter. The key is the state of mind. If you cultivate with heaven's choice, no matter where you go, you won't be able to adapt because there are no Tao tablets. On the other hand, if you have the same mentality as the cultivators of the origin world and build your own Tao tablets without great Tao tablets, then what difference does it make whether you go to the origin world or not? This was also a very mainstream view. It was very popular among the high-level cultivators. It was also the most intense clash of the two thoughts in the great Tao. Following the crowd wasn't the style of cultivators. So, the Heaven's Choice continent would never be able to form a united force. If it was formed, such a large force would all go to the origin world. There might not be any domain that could withstand it. That would be an absolute suppression of numbers. This was the thought of the Heaven's Choice cultivators that he had come into contact with the most in the few years he had been here. It was very realistic and very messy. It was very difficult to truly judge anything from it. He only had one doubt. In all these thoughts, it was the clash of the Taoist thoughts, but he had never heard of the Buddhist divergence. Was it indifference? Resigned to adversity? Was it using an action? Or had it been decided long ago? He was leaning towards the latter. In hung state, in the ruins of the slaughtered Tao tablet, he still didn't obtain anything. This was within his expectations, but it also made him very confused. Even the slaughter fragments in his sea of consciousness didn't have any reaction. It was the same as Taishu, karma, and fate. Liu Xiaoyi couldn't help but start to doubt himself. Was there a mistake in his intuition? He had already wasted several years of his time. The day of the diplomatic mission's return was nearing. Should he continue to persist? Persist without any hope? But his intuition was so strong. He was very sure that his opportunity to become an upper-level true monarch was in the Heaven's Choice continent. He was very sure that the source of this opportunity was in the 6 great Taos completed by his nascent soul. Of course, this wasn't Tao unification, but his nascent soul's understanding of the universe. When his nascent soul accumulated to a certain extent in the 36 Xiantian Taos that made up the world, it tacitly agreed that he had the right to become an upper-level true monarch. His intuition was that there were 6. After all, he was only in the Ein Soul true monarch realm, not a golden immortal. He didn't need to gather all 36. He only lacked the 5 elements. The opportunity still lay in the 5 elements. Like what Taoist Pang said, the fate of the Tao. In theory, that was the case, but his intuition didn't feel that way. He kept feeling that if he went to the 5 elements tablet, not only would it not be beneficial, it would instead be harmful. It was an inexplicable feeling. Just like that, he stayed in hung state, stayed in the ruins of the massacred Tao tablet, bitterly thinking about the answer to achieving Tao. The people around him came and left and came again. Wave after wave, only he stayed here. It looked like he had gone mad. In his life of cultivation, it seemed that every major juncture was different. When he was building his foundation, he swallowed the foot-washing pill. When he was building his Jindan, he gambled on the reverse space. Yuanying, he broke through and then stood up. Then this time, he couldn't even find the door. When others reached the upper level, they had a set of strict and complicated processes. If they followed this process, they would at least have a beginning. It didn't matter if they succeeded in the end. Right now, he was only lacking a beginning. Because of his nascent soul, there was no path to follow. Until one day, A Jindan cultivator brought his disciple here to experience. Seeing his existence, he didn't dare to disturb him and stayed far away. But the Foundation establishment disciple didn't think too much. He asked countless questions. Master, is this the collapsed Great Tao tablet? How come I don't feel anything? Jindan was very patient. If you felt something, you wouldn't just be a Foundation establishment. The disciple asked again, are there many Great Tao tablets of Heaven's Choice that have collapsed? Will they continue to collapse? Jindan answered, I can't answer too many questions because Master doesn't know either. But up until now, 6 have collapsed. First was morality, then destiny, then merit, void, massacre, and impermanence. As for the future, who knows? This was the disciple's first time hearing this, because Master usually wouldn't tell him these things. Oh, so it was morality that started. How could it be morality? So strange. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly understood. Chapter 1235. It couldn't be said that he completely understood, but he realized that he had been trapped in a misunderstanding all along. He had always been self-centered, searching for the 6 great Taos that he was familiar with. Destiny, 5 elements, merit, void, massacre, and impermanence. He thought that what he lacked was the connection between these 6 great Taos. However, his nascent self had shattered himself on Rustar and Zhou Xian and rebuilt the small universe as its foundation. Then, when such a body formed the nascent self, should it refer more to the creation and destruction of the universe's innate Taos? In fact, the creation and destruction of the universe's great Taos were slightly different from the innate Taos that he had comprehended. The difference was that he had comprehended the 5 elements, but the universe's 5 elements still existed. There was a great Tao that was very unfamiliar to him, but it was indispensable to his small universe's modified body. That was morality. Then, could it be that the 6 great Taos didn't include the 5 elements? Should it include morality? That didn't seem right. In his intuition, he already had the 6 great Taos, so there was nothing missing. Maybe he just lacked a catalyst? How could he pull the strings of the 6 great Taos? The collapse of morality was the beginning of chaos. What could be more appropriate than morality as a thread? The collapse of the universe's great Taos started from morality. He came from the universe, so he naturally had to conform to the changes of the universe. How could he ignore the existence of morality? He finally understood that it wasn't the 5 elements, nor any of the 6 great Taos that he had comprehended. It was morality. It was the beginning of chaos, and also the beginning of a new life. This was the most important direction that he had come to Heaven's Choice. He was wicked. A year later, the travel-worn Lu Xiaoyi arrived at Jia country, where the Tao Steel of morality was located. If the state of Yuan on the great path of destiny was filled with desolation, then in the state of Jia, it was almost like a mortal country. It was even difficult to find any obvious signs of cultivation. This was very easy to understand. Destiny country had been broken for thousands of years, and the low-level cultivators in the country had withered. Only the major cultivators were still there. In Jia country, morality had been broken for more than 10,000 years, and even the major cultivators couldn't hold on because they didn't have enough lifespan. If Heaven's Choice half-immortal didn't leave, there might still be a few half-immortals here. But once the half-immortal left, which true monarch could live for more than 10,000 years? After the first batch of true monarchs died, no true monarchs chose this place as their Tao integration ground. The middle and low-level cultivators all went to neighboring countries, and all the major cultivators died. This place gradually became a barren land for cultivators. Jia country didn't have the Tao of morality, so of course Des country didn't t-test moralities t-t-test? T-t-s-s-s-s. After that time, as caused the t-t-s caused the universe's cultivators t. Assesses Dao's Dao. Ants. S behind. World cultivators, cultivation, cultivators. Dao, 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 Dao. Dao, Dao, Dao. Dao, 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 Dao. They could not afford to offend that person, even if they heard that this person was no longer around. As a result, Jia country, which was abandoned by the cultivation world, slowly became a paradise for mortals. It became a very strange existence in the Heaven's Choice continent. Cultivators were warned not to go to Jia country from the start of their cultivation. They were warned not to go there and not to cause trouble. Even if they had special reasons to go there, they were to come in a hurry and leave in a hurry. They didn't dare to reveal their cultivation realm, fearing that they would be tainted by something bad. Except for mortals. Other than not being able to cultivate, mortals weren't any weaker than cultivators in terms of intelligence. They were both cunning and all-pervasive. It only took them a few hundred years to figure out what position they were in on this huge continent. They might be weak, the weakest, but on the other hand, because of their special nature, they could be very strong. It wasn't the strength of their hard power, but the strength of their soft power. This was a country of morality. What mortals needed to do was to continuously deepen this aspect. They needed to become the moral benchmark of this continent. They needed to use morality to establish their country, use morality as their learning, and use morality to improve themselves. This was the foundation of their existence. They were the embodiment of morality. They were also the only country in the Heaven's Choice continent that didn't take cultivation as an honor. They worked here, while the cultivation world looked on coldly from the side. After watching for nearly 10,000 years, they reached a strange balance. Jia country's rule was that they didn't welcome cultivators. Of course, under the overall cultivation environment of the Heaven's Choice continent, it was impossible to completely eliminate cultivation. Their rule was that cultivators were allowed to cultivate, but they had to leave Jia country after building their foundation. How to enforce such a rule was a difficult problem, and it was a problem of habit. The most important thing was the atmosphere of the entire Jia kingdom. Everyone had parents and clans, and they could not be born from the cracks of rocks. When a cultivator built his foundation, he was only a few decades old, and his parents and clans were still around. Under the enormous pressure of moral public opinion, most cultivators would choose to leave obediently after they had built their Taoist foundation. Firstly, it was to repay their parents and clans. Secondly, there weren't any proper cultivation forces in Jia country. Without any inheritances, what was the point of staying here? But even if they weren't welcomed, how could there be no cultivators in the continent? There were various reasons that couldn't be discussed in detail. But there was a tacit rule in the cultivation world. You could enter, but you should enter like an ordinary person. You shouldn't fly all over the sky and show off your cultivation methods to lure in mortals. While Lu Xiaoyi was flying to the kingdom of Jia, he had also learned a thing or two about the local customs and customs of the continent. According to his understanding, if a cultivation country was surrounded by mortal countries, it might be possible for them to maintain their own rules because they had strength. But if a mortal country wanted to maintain its independence in the cultivation world, how could that be possible? Unless this was tacitly approved by the cultivation world of Heaven's Choice and assisted in the dark. As for the reason, it might be difficult for other cultivators to guess, but it wasn't hard for him to guess. It was because of the person behind the collapse of morality, because of extreme fear, because they were afraid of reviving, and they didn't dare to openly target him. So after 10,000 years, the Kaunos people came up with such a thing. They started to indulge mortals. Didn't you want to descend to the mortal world with morality? Then, why don't you just turn Jia country into a mortal country? Is this to your liking? In order to erase all traces, they didn't hesitate to let the entire Jia country stay away from cultivation. There was only a possibility of 1 in a trillion. But what they didn't expect was that the arrangements they made over the past 10,000 years were meaningless. Their 13th ancestor had already considered the future when he destroyed morality. Now that the dominoes had fallen, it was no longer Jia country's problem. However, the habits of 10,000 years still continued, and Jia country became what it was now. Even if the cultivation world of Heaven's Choice no longer paid attention to it, it still continued to move downwards. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.